From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio. I'm the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. March 8, 1999 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. WWF faces backlash for being risque. WCW's Renegade passes away, tons more. By Observer staff. With a deluge of media publicity, including a cover story in USA Today, a two-part series on Inside Edition, and even being the topic of conversation on the TV show Politically Incorrect, and with an ESPN Outside the Lines segment scheduled for later this month, both WWF and WCW have taken separate directions that will no doubt determine the future of the wrestling industry in the United States. A few things are clear. There are forces within the various companies and television stations airing the products who are seeing the bad publicity and attempting to tone down the product. At the same time as receiving all the bad publicity, the WWF is flourishing, selling out all 5 weekend events and setting all-time record ratings for Raw, outperforming Nitro by 2 full points and doing tremendous merchandising business aimed at teenagers. Some aspects of the show on March 1st were toned down due to the bad publicity. The camera shots being done to miss rather than exploit wrestlers flipping each other off, and language was slightly toned down. The product as a whole has slightly toned down since mid-January, with the Mark Henry blowjob skit, Chyna's breasts being grabbed, and the Godfather's hosts lifting up their dress and bending over and shaking their asses. But the company is still exploiting its raunchiness and getting great results from it, such as Hunter Hearst Helmsley getting a woman to take off her top at a house show in Washington, D.C., Deborah having her robe ripped off and left in her bra and panties on the Raw show, and Road Dogg, fresh from rehab, wearing a t-shirt on Raw which basically refers to rolling a joint and pointing to a 420 marijuana sign in the crowd. In addition, Phil Mushnick reported this week, and it was confirmed elsewhere, that the WWF floated the idea of having accidental nudity at the WrestleMania pay-per-view show with M&M Mars, the corporate sponsor of the show, and at least one leading cable MSO, and both vetoed the idea. At the same time, TSN, due to all the bad publicity the show has received, particularly in Winnipeg, has been editing the show to the point that the version of Raw that aired on March 2nd was said to have nearly every other word edited out, to the point that you couldn't even make sense out of most of the interviews and storylines. WCW is clearly wanting to go in another direction to avoid the bad publicity and distance itself from the WWF. The WWF is clearly to an extent courting the bad publicity. At the same time, TSN is trying to run from it, to the point Vince McMahon actually wrote a guest editorial childishly name-calling his critics, clearly designed to get a reaction, feeling bad publicity is good publicity, since it rallies his audience behind his product. History has shown two things about the bad publicity is good publicity, or there's no such thing as bad publicity theory. Basically and simply put, bad publicity is often good publicity over the short term and sometimes over the long term, until it becomes bad publicity. Within this industry, two cases stand out: the WWF steroid problems, which resulted in some bad publicity in 1992, although not to anywhere near the extent of what is about to happen. The theory was that wrestling fans wouldn't care about the subject. For whatever reason, it resulted in a 3-year major tailspin for the industry, with both major companies being several $1 million in the red every year. In 1996, UFC started receiving bad publicity about it being barbaric. At the beginning, that publicity probably helped the buy rates and created curiosity for the product. But the end result of that bad publicity has been the death of the genre on a major league basis in the United States. One can also point out, in different generations, certain television shows that were heavily criticized for being beyond the bounds of good taste when they first aired are now in hindsight considered all-time classic shows. Which is the likely end result of what is going to happen now? The audience loyalty to the WWF product has never been higher. And the revenues generated, be it from advertising, pay-per-view, and licensing, are so outrageous these days that the idea that sponsors, at least at this point, are going to pull out of the WWF, which these days is considered a great buy for products aimed at teenage boys in particular, as was suggested once again at a company meeting on March 1st by Eric Bischoff, doesn't appear likely. You didn't see any cable companies refuse to carry Mike Tyson's last fight, did you? But that isn't to say it's impossible for it to happen, because in 1995, UFC was all the rage on pay-per-view, drawing buy rates that topped WWF and WCW at the time. When the heat came and it reacted by trying to add more rules, it was already too late. The proverbial boulder running downhill had gathered momentum. And even with its January show doing a healthy 0.65 buy rate, Almost no cable companies in the United States are airing its show on March 5th because there is such a thing as bad publicity, whether it's logical, illogical, informed or not informed. As far as the short term goes, the public has spoken with these words, the raunchier the better. Raw pulled its all-time record rating on March 1st, doing a 6.32 rating, 6.38 first hour, 6.27 seconds hour, and 9.6 share. Nitro did a 4.32 rating, 5.15 first hour, 3.73 seconds hour, 3.99 third hour, and a 6.4 share, although over the head-to-head period the Nitro rating was a 3.87 with a 5.9 share. There was no period head-to-head where the ratings were competitive. The closest WCW came was when Raw presented its weakest quarter, a Public Enemy Brood angle, a Droz vs. Blackman kendo stick match, and a video of Friends of Shane McMahon which did a 5.6, while Nitro had a Wolfpack interview with Hogan that did a 4.3. The next quarter, where Raw had Undertaker vs. Mankind and Nitro had a Ric Flair interview that the show was built around, the gap had moved to 6.3 to 3.8. For the comparative main events, both of which drew great crowd heat to the live venues, Austin vs. Kane did a 6.41 final quarter and an amazing 7.54 overrun, the highest segment rating in history in a competitive situation, totaling 5,684,000 homes and approximately 8.5 million viewers. The Goldberg and Rick Steiner vs. Scott Steiner and Bagwell match, which did a 3.81 final quarter and 3.99 overrun, which means in the final moments WWF nearly doubled the WCW audience. With Sunday Night Heat not airing due to a satellite uplink problem, and a rerun of last week's show still did a 3.74 rating, there is probably something to that helping the Raw rating because people wouldn't want to miss 2 consecutive episodes of the soap opera, but with a gap that big, it's not like that changed anything significantly. There have been many internet reports during the week that due to the success of Raw, that USA Network was going to expand the show to 3 hours. WWF officials on March 2nd said that according to Vince McMahon's office, they knew nothing about such a thing even being proposed. About the only good news during the week for WCW as far as comparative numbers were concerned, besides strong house show performances in San Antonio, Greenville, South Carolina, and for Nitro in Chapel Hill, were that even though WWF presented an Austin vs. McMahon cage match after a year of build-up on its St. Valentine's Day Massacre show, which did a 1.21 buy rate, WCW was in the ballpark 1 week later for Super Brawl headline, by Flair vs. Hogan doing a 1.10, which would be a $5.27 million company gross, and WCW would have been even closer without that terrible skit on the Tampa Nitro show with the beating in the field, which no doubt hurt the buy rate. The 2-part Inside Edition piece on pro wrestling was a mixed bag. The first segment, largely releasing the Indiana University study of 50 episodes of Raw, 1,658 instances of a wrestler grabbing or pointing to his crotch or roughly once every 4 minutes, 434 references to suck it, 157 instances of giving the finger, etc., and bringing these figures up to an argumentative Vince McMahon was a pretty strong segment. McMahon came off bad to most, a total jerk to the general public, although not as bad on the NBC piece. He looked the worst when trying to claim the WWF doesn't use prostitutes and that the words prostitutes or whores aren't even on the show, and the Inside Edition reporter responded saying hoes, which is 2 steps sleazier. McMahon argued hoes was a street term and that the people are actresses and not prostitutes. WWF also claimed there are no satanic references and angles on Raw. He actually tried to claim the WWF is actually a tame and conservative television product because nobody dies. Well, except in real life. And nobody gets raped, except in storyline by the guy who died in real life. The second segment was really cheesy, which was too bad because the subject of deaths of pro wrestlers due to drugs and suicides is an unfortunately subject filled with material. There were some notes never reported before, but basically passed off trying to get to the meat of the story and instead built to a camera crew was secretly filming antics at a hotel bar of WCW personnel, which wound up being pretty tame, since the worst they could find was Ric Flair buying a few beers, a woman showing a wrestler her tattoo, and Chris Jericho playfully taking Dave Penzer's clothes off in the lobby of the hotel. Independent wrestler Ricky Nelson talked about seeing wrestlers do cocaine in the dressing room, and whether the story is true or not, and no doubt it is true, Nelson was just coming off doing a worked angle on the Jenny Jones show, so his credibility has some flaws. Ricky Morton basically admitted to losing his house, his family and everything through the wild partying lifestyle, and I was interviewed saying nothing of any real consequence. The second segment, which was heavily criticized, did reveal that Eddie Gilbert's heart attack death was later declared as being from a cocaine overdose, which had never been reported before, It noted that Brian Pillman's death certificate noted recent cocaine use as a possible cause for his heart attack death, which has been but hasn't widely been played up. They noted that drugs played a part in the deaths of Louis Spicolli and Art Barr. USA Today, in a front-page story on February 26, focused less on the sleazy aspects in the storylines and more on kids pretending to be wrestlers and injuring other kids, and talked about kids in backyard wrestling federations. If you think about it, that story was really stupid, because if kids weren't pretending to be wrestlers, they'd probably be playing football or basketball or baseball and finding a way to get hurt as well. And that's hardly an argument to take those sports off television. Since the USA Today story had a large photo of Goldberg with it, and seeing the direction these stories were going, WCW felt the need to differentiate itself from WWF and no longer get painted with the same brush. WCW informed production personnel that afternoon that from this point forward they were going to be a G-rated wrestling company. Well, at least as G-rated as matches involving chains and barbed wire can be. Before the March 1st Nitro, Bischoff had a meeting with the wrestlers about the subject, saying the company is going the opposite direction of the WWF. Bischoff had 1 week earlier knocked the WWF heavily on an Atlanta radio show, and received several phone calls challenging him, pointing to situations in WWF, such as the Scott Steiner-Kimberly angle, the crotch chopping, and the language used by Steiner in his interviews. Bischoff told the wrestlers in April that he expected many sponsors to leave WWF, and claimed the company would be in big trouble in 6 months to 1 year. Of course, he said not all that long ago that the WWF would be out of business in 6 months, for the same reason, and it's bigger than ever today. He noted that in 1998, for the year in total, that WCW slightly beat WWF in pay-per-view, a claim that is questionable, but some sources have reported WCW slightly winning in pay-per-view in 1998 after winning huge in 1997. Observer figures showed WWF slightly winning in 1998 after WCW won handily in 1997, and in television ratings, which for the year as a whole is the case, although WWF dominated the latter months. He made a point that ratings themselves don't really mean a lot, because if you don't have sponsors, you can't make money off your ratings, which was a big problem the wrestling industry had until the past 2 or 3 years, when big-name sponsors jumped aboard, even though there were periods in the past of very impressive ratings. He pointed to Jerry Springer, who was forced to tone down his show by his sponsors even though it was drawing good ratings, and claimed the public didn't like the tamer Springer, who he said was now fighting for survival. He said WCW wasn't going to try and compete with WWF in what they do, but would concentrate on what WCW does well. Reportedly, nobody asked Eric at that point exactly what that would be. Among the items he specifically talked with wrestlers about included telling Rey Mysterio Jr. no more Bronco-busting spots, Perry Saturn could no longer put his opponent's head inside his dress, Scott Steiner, who earlier in the week on a radio show Bischoff said he would ban from doing live interviews until he toned down his act, could no longer make the sexual references, Norman Smiley could no longer do the big wiggle, Conan can't grab his crotch, the language had to be cleaned up, and no more crotch chopping. The show was noticeably different, and its being beaten so badly in the ratings was more due to WWF being so hot and WCW presenting long matches and a slower-paced show in the head-to-head 2 hours than due to any change in philosophy over 1 week. The only real noticeable change was Scott Steiner's references to his hooches and sexual innuendos being not just toned down, but eliminated. But it is clear when word gets out, at least for the short run, these changes won't benefit the WCW ratings, but then again, they aren't designed to do anything but save the product if the heat gets worse. McMahon in the New York Daily News on February 28 ripped his critics, mainly through name-calling. He called Bob Peters of Morality in the Media a guy with no sense of humor, scoffed at the bishop in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which banned the WWF from the Catholic Youth Center, and the principal in Winnipeg that banned wrestling for their school, and an egghead professor who ran the Indiana University study. He misrepresented stats, claiming that more than 70% of the audience for Raw is 18 and over, actually 63%, and even in the Inside Edition piece, which was edited out, the reporter and McMahon were arguing with McMahon insisting Raw's audience is no more than 15% kids and the reporter claiming 33%, both claims of course being lower than it actually is. He talked about Livewire and Superstars being edited differently to be more kid-friendly, which is where his arguments completely fall apart since more kids watch Raw than either Livewire or Superstars. So if those shows have to be edited, that's the best argument that Raw is too vulgar for kids. He did say that the prime-time shows may not be suitable for the youngest members of the house and said we leave that for you to decide. And ultimately, as pointed out before, if parents willingly are buying foam rubber middle fingers for 4-year-old kids, they are far more to blame than the WWF for the kids owning and waving those fingers. McMahon wrote, "Lofty politicians, who at this point haven't gotten into the act, so this may be a peremptory strike since that may be the next step, out of touch. Moral crusaders who don't have a clue and egghead professors with flinty studies treat the common man with contempt rather than address the issues of scenes so risque that neither Inside Edition nor NBC Dateline could even show the scenes that would be the most objectionable in their stories that were trying to make the point about how far the product has gone." Very few people knew the name Richard Wilson, but for a brief period, he was being groomed to be one of the biggest stars in the industry. That period didn't last long. His wrestling career after that point was hardly notable, and in a world that has been so numb to where the passing away of relatively young men is often commonplace, his death from a self-imposed gunshot wound appeared to be coldly accepted as an inevitable statistic rather than mourned by sadness within the profession. Wilson, 33, who wrestled as the Renegade for WCW until recent weeks, shot himself during an argument with his girlfriend on February 22 at their home in Marietta, Georgia. He was apparently despondent after having just been let go by WCW, which used him only sparingly after giving him a major push in 1995 due to his resemblance to the Ultimate Warrior. He was known by those in WCW as a quiet wrestler who kept to himself when he was brought in for television events that he was rarely used at and didn't appear to be very close with anyone. His career break was almost a fluke, and it didn't last long. In 1995, Hulk Hogan and Jimmy Hart were looking to bring the Ultimate Warrior back to WCW. When Jim Hellwig wanted $2.5 million per year, WCW balked. Wendell Weatherby, an independent promoter at the time in the New England area who was Hellwig's personal chauffeur during his WWF glory days and knew what was going down in the negotiations, suggested a look-alike in Wilson to fill the spot, who was wrestling independently in the Boston area as Rio Lord of the Jungle but was very inexperienced. He was brought in, originally teased as being Warrior himself, with video clips of him in the background obscured by steam while Hogan and Hart did promos for a pay-per-view match against Vader. The idea they were trying to portray was that the real Warrior was returning at that year's uncensored pay-per-view event on March 19, 1995 in Tupelo, Mississippi to be in Hogan's corner for a strap match against Vader, who was to have Ric Flair in his corner. Promo pieces with Wilson in the background, dressed to look like Ultimate Warrior, enough so that WWF threatened legal action to attempt to kill the entire angle, and billed as the ultimate surprise highlighted what at the time was considered something of a promotional fraud. With entrance music made and ring costuming like Warrior had in WWF, he was told to mimic all of Hellwig's mannerisms, including no-selling spots and the dancing comeback against the top heels in the company like Flair and Vader on early shows. He had RW on his tights, which originally was going to be his ring name, Renegade Warrior, but the Warrior part of the name was dropped after legal threats from Titan, which owned the Ultimate Warrior name. The RW stayed on his tights since it was his actual initials of his real name. The name Renegade was picked from the popular TV show of the same name at the time starring Lorenzo Lamas. The WWF legal department scared the Warrior out of WCW and he became simply known as Renegade. His run was brief as fans quickly wisened up to what he was and wasn't, naturally faster than management figured they would, and the people had already seen through him before WCW tried to save face by having him beat experienced top-level workers in 2 minutes and less. Similar to Hellwig's push in WWF and Goldberg's later successful push in WCW, and win the TV title. But that didn't work either. One time at a worldwide taping, they decided to put him in the ring with an experienced star to carry him before losing to a named Steve Austin. The match was said to have been horrible, since Renegade was not ready for a match of more than 2 minutes on the major league stage, and on this night Austin was no miracle worker, to the point of it being perhaps the single low point of Austin's career. There was tremendous resentment among the other wrestlers, as there always is when a young wrestler who isn't very good in the ring gets pushed ahead of respected veterans, particularly when the other wrestlers could justify their belief when he wasn't getting over, feeling the company brought in a stripper who didn't even know what he was doing in the ring simply because Hogan couldn't get Hellwig to come in. And that even when it wasn't working, it was still being pushed anyway because of Hogan's influence. Actually, his push, coming on the heels of similar WCW failures like Van Hammer and Eric Watts, was considered one of the great comedy stories at the time, although perhaps dark comedy to the crew. His win over Austin was followed up with wins over the likes of Arn Anderson and Paul Orndorff. By the time he won the TV title from Anderson on June 18, 1995 at the Great American Bash pay-per-view in Dayton, it was already too late. He was practically booed off the beach when he beat Orndorff at the Outdoor Bash at the Beach pay-per-view in Huntington Beach the next month. It wasn't until September 17, 1995 when the TV title was taken from him and given to Diamond Dallas Page in Asheville, North Carolina in a match that Page did a real good job of carrying. He was never used regularly after that point. He was never really pushed after that, although there was a brief attempt in 1996 to push he, Joe Gomez and Jim Powers as three pretty boy types as a trio, which lasted only a few weeks before it was dropped. When Hellwig came to WCW in late 1998, Renegade would occasionally be used as his double for magic acts where Warrior had to be in two places at the same time, such as the War Games pay-per-view. Hellwig always hated Wilson for stealing his gimmick and didn't talk to Weatherby for years, feeling he was the one who made the connection. Those in WCW recall at the Nitro on September 14th in Greenville, South Carolina, which will forever be remembered as the night Flair came back, that Hellwig had to thank Wilson for coming from under the ring to play him to set up his own spot, that he eventually tore his bicep doing, brawling outside the cage the night before at the disastrous War Games event. But after thanking him, he went back to immediately burying him. Wilson remained under contract to WCW, occasionally being used as a TV jobber, and was told they'd keep him as long as he continued to go to the power plant to improve. But there was little or no improvement, and about 8 months ago he stopped going. He had failed a steroid test at one point and told in no uncertain terms to get off the gas if he wanted to keep his job. Many questioned what that was all about, being that this was WCW, but he got off the gas, and in turn let himself get bloated and out of shape. He was little more than a guy who resembled Hellwig with a juiced-up physique, and without the physique, there was nothing there. He was finally let go by WCW a few weeks ago. Richard Wilson was born October 16, 1965 and grew up in Lilburn, Georgia, and was best friends growing up with Georgia independent wrestler Mike Cervich. He had received minimal training by former wrestler Jerry Oates of Columbus, Georgia before moving to the Boston area while working as a stripper where he met Richard Byrne at a nightclub in 1992. Byrne, a karate instructor who also trained wrestlers, wrestled and promoted independently. Wilson worked for a stripping troupe called Men in Motion and he was apparently very successful at it. He was constantly mistaken for Warrior long before he ever had a pro wrestling match. Byrne saw how women reacted to him and wanted to get him on his shows, particularly since he dropped the name Jerry Oates and said he'd done some pro wrestling training. Byrne trained him and booked him on his shows almost immediately. Both wanted to stay as far away from the Warrior gimmick as possible, so he was given a Tarzan-type role as Rio, Lord of the Jungle, and put in very short matches to hide his inexperience. He worked for some New England indies, but some promoters, like Killer Kowalski in the area, wouldn't use him because he was so limited. Byrne also got him booked into Japan for the War promotion. One thing those who were friends with him at the time he got the WCW break all noted is that Wilson did not want to originally take the deal, but it was convinced he couldn't turn down such a break. He was adamant about not wanting to do a Warrior gimmick since Byrne had impressed upon him when he started doing indies that it was a surefire failure because people would see him as an imitator, and he had since met Hellwig on a few indie shows in the Northeast and the two got along. He was a great kid, Byrne said. I worried about him, in WCW. They used him. They jobbed him and they cut him loose. I hadn't talked to him in a few months. I think he was kind of ashamed that he had the shot and didn't make it. After working the 1995 uncensored pay-per-view, he was signed to a 2-year deal at $150,000 per year, but was not used much after the first few months. In recent years he had been living with his girlfriend, who had something of a name in the world of stripping. Steve Austin's appearance on February 26 in the CBS television show Nash Bridges was at least being seriously talked about for a possible future spin-off. Austin's performance in the role of a renegade cop was largely praised, and perhaps more importantly, made a significant impact on the ratings. The show generally does in the mid-7s, and the episode with Austin drew a 9.8 rating and won its time slot. CBS heavily promoted Austin all week, tabbing Friday Stone Cold Friday in its television and radio promos for its Friday prime time shows. The character he played, Jake Cage, was largely Stone Cold Steve Austin as a police officer, so there really wasn't much new ground for him. As in wrestling, he's got the role down perfectly and has great television presence. If there was a negative to his performance, it wasn't so much anything he did, but his size, as he almost looked too large and bulky on camera as compared with the much smaller actors on the show. Nash Bridges, which has had pro wrestlers on it before, Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn last season, stars Don Johnson and has probably one more season left before going into syndication. The production company wants a spin-off show with ideas being talked about include a vehicle for co-star Cheech Marin in the role he currently plays, or possibly a role for Austin in the Jake Cage role, based in either San Francisco, where the Nash Bridges show is filmed, or Texas. Austin, who had the role written specifically for him after being approached by a friend of Johnson's at a WWF event, was talked with about a potential series, but at this point it was nothing but Hollywood talk and he's not taking anything seriously until it's on the table. Austin, in an interview on the Mancow radio show this past week, stated that he was looking at wrestling 1 or 2 more years. He talked since his 1997 neck injury about only wrestling a few more years, although if he were walk out on top at the age of 35 or 36, he turned 34 in December, unless his body forced him out due to injuries. He'd be one of the few ever to do so, and the few main event wrestlers who did leave to pursue acting all came back rather quickly. A television series would be far less physically taxing, but comes with far more professional risks, as Austin is basically locked for many years barring injury into being a huge draw. He's also at this point one of the few men who can earn more money in pro wrestling than as a star of a network television series. We have little in the way of details at press time on the death of Satoshi Hasagawa of the Pancrase organization on March 1st. Hasagawa, 22, fell off a balcony of his 3rd floor of his Tokyo apartment to his death. Reports from Japan indicate it was an accidental stumbling off a ledge at approximately 1:45 p.m. and he died in the hospital at approximately 10:15 p.m. at evening from the variety of injuries. There were no reports indicating it was a suicide. Hasagawa had begun his wrestling career with the Pancrase organization on July 22, 1996, and had compiled a 12-15-1 career record as mainly a skilled mid-level performer noted within the company for having a lot of guts. His biggest career win, and one of the bigger upsets in Pancrase history, was when he, at 5'7" and 170 pounds, made Semishield, at 6'10.5" and 255 pounds and the favorite to be the next king of Pancrase, tap out to an ankle lock submission on February 6, 1998 in 3:56. In the years to come, there will likely be more written about the Akira Maeda vs. Alexander Karellin match on February 21st from the Yokohama Arena than any match within pro wrestling this year. The match is not only notable because it was the debut of the most successful competitive wrestler who ever lived into pro wrestling, but because it bridged 3 different worlds together: pro wrestling, amateur wrestling, and martial arts. And after the fact, because of endless speculation that has and will no doubt continue to transpire over what it exactly was, perhaps for years given the amount of coverage the event received in Japan thus far. In addition, Japan, far more than the US, is into long-term historical sports perspective when it comes to pro wrestling, and the US is more soap opera where history is generally forgotten after the next episode of the television show. After viewing a tape of the show, it is not easily clear, which will no doubt make the debate on what it was that much more vociferous. Karellin is a freak. He came in at 295 pounds and was ripped, with his strength generated in particular in his low back and thighs. He didn't have the bloated denseness of a steroid user and was almost lithe and sinewy in build, yet still weighed 295, which is where the freakishness of the big head and big hands comes in. I wouldn't try and insult anyone's intelligence by using the fact he never failed a steroid test in sports as evidence of anything, as announcers have done over the past 3 Olympic Games, particularly for a man whose nickname at one time was the Experiment. While there are no doubt plenty of weightlifters who can push more iron, I doubt there would be many, if anyone in the world, who could outpower him in man-on-man strength, which has been evident for more than a decade as he's gone unbeaten and almost untouched in Greco-Roman wrestling. None of that has much to do with the big question. I'm skeptical of the legitimacy of the match. The match had great intensity, and no matter what it was a huge success both financially and as an event and a spectacle for the market it played to. It will be remembered in a positive light by everyone except for those who considered nothing but its legitimacy, and the fact Karellin was involved in a work. Of course, that's because the live audience was largely those who see rings as an offshoot of pro wrestling. For those looking at it from the other 2 worlds, amateur wrestling, which doesn't do works, and martial arts, which sometimes does depending upon the sport, the framework of judging this would be different. The 2 did an outstanding job of making it appear to be legitimate for 10 minutes, which is difficult. Karellin had doubtfully never worked a match before, although he did throw people around in what was called an exhibition in 1989 at a New Japan show at Tokyo Sumo Hall. It was believable enough that people who wanted to believe wouldn't be disappointed, and apparently the Japanese media covered it as if it was legitimate, and it received tremendous mainstream sports coverage. But there were holes, and it was ultimately more a pro wrestling match than a competitive mixed martial arts match. First, it appeared Karellin gave Maeda his leg in the first round and waited for Maeda to put the ankle lock on him and then grabbed the ropes for a point. The way Maeda got the leg with an ankle pick and the way move was set up didn't seem believable given Karellin's skill level as a wrestler. Because Karellin is inexperienced at the submission aspect, although he was a Soviet military champion in Samba as a teenager, the hesitation in Karellin's reactions waiting for the move appeared a giveaway. The second round began with what looked to be a high spot. Maeda took Karellin down and got his back and went for a choke. Karellin quickly reversed it and got a cranking headlock for a rope break point in the first 25 seconds. If one can argue that things that shouldn't happen can happen to explain the first point, because world-class wrestlers have been surprisingly taken down in MMA matches before, although never a wrestler of Karellin's credentials by a man pushing 40 like Maeda, the second point kills the arguments. There's no way Maeda could cleanly take down Karellin twice, and certainly no way in the manner he did in the second round. Where it gets weird is that everything from that point forward looked pretty legit, although there were holes if you look for them closely where Karellin seemed to ease off the pressure, but other times he appeared to be trying to bend Maeda in very painful positions with his freakish strength. If someone were to argue that they agreed to give each other one spot and it was legit from there, it would be an arguable case, although that probably wasn't what it was either. It did appear Karellin was trying to finish Maeda with submissions the entire second round as opposed to laying on him and carrying him for time, as we've seen when guys have carried other guys for him in otherwise legitimate pancrase matches. The crowd intensity was tremendous for Maeda's spurts of offense, which gave the match an authentic sports feel since Karellin couldn't block leg kicks and Maeda can throw them. Late in the first round, when Karellin did his Karellin lift, it appeared he was taking something off the impact of the slam, but he was so powerful in the jarring to Maeda while landing was still devastating. I have no doubt Maeda took tremendous legitimate punishment over the course of the match and deserves a lot credit for hanging in there and finishing his career with the match he'll always be remembered for in a positive way and what will be one of the two defining moments of his career, even though he lost. The Ring's organization also became headline fodder in British tabloids the Daily Mail and Daily Star this past week due to Lee Hasdell promoting a show on March 7 in Milton Keynes, England. The tabloids called the Rings show Ultimate Fighting Championship Rings and used quotes from Senator John McCain about UFC and the death of Douglas Dedge in Russia on an MMA show, trying to say the show should be banned due to it being barbaric. One story claimed that Tank Abbott was elbowed in the head 256 times on a Rings show, which would be accurate except that elbows to the head are illegal in rings, and that Abbott has never fought in rings. There was also a photo of Dedge being taken out on a stretcher before dying. As an event, the final was a good mix of styles and a successful event in attempting to attract new fans to the company through the mainstream curiosity from the main event. Whether Kiyoshi Tamura, who avenged his most devastating loss of his career, although it was a worked win to avenge a shoot loss. This is where Rings gets confusing to everyone because you never know exactly what it is until it takes place, and even then sometimes you don't really know. Tamura put on a great performance in the semi-final in his win. Will Tamura be able to keep some of the curious fans interested in Rings is the question that answers the company's future. 1. Yasuhito Namikawa beat Ryuki Wayama via 1-0 score after the 20 minutes time limit expired. The only point was Wayama getting a yellow card 8:30 in and it wasn't even clear what for. This was a real good shoot match under Rings rules. A lot of good standing exchanges with Namikawa getting the better of it. Namikawa actually tried a Baba-style high kick in a shoot. As the match went on, Namikawa tired and Wayama, in his debut match, nearly got him twice with chokes. Wayama is the typical 180-pound Japanese shoot fighter with endless stamina and a lot of skill. If it hadn't been for the yellow card, this would have been a very difficult decision. 2. Yoshihisa Yamamoto beat Andrei Kopylov in 6:55. This was a worked match and turned out to be pretty good for the style with good holds and switches on both sides. The score was tied 3-3 before Yamamoto caught him with a choke in the middle and Kopylov struggled before tapping. 2.5 stars. 3. Volkan beat Nikolai Zuev in 4:49 with a combination half crab using his legs instead of his arms for the crab and using his arms for a facelock. This was a very good worked match, particularly Han doing his great mat work and submissions. 2.75 stars. 4. Sean Alvarez beat Wataru Sakata by decision in a 20 minutes Vale Tudo match. Alvarez weighed 244 to Sakata's 195, and was looking like a cross between Mark Coleman and Scott Steiner. This was a shoot under Vale Tudo rules, basically similar to UFC but without stand-up, so the match could continue forever stalled on the ground, as it did, but really boring, but the fans were still really into it anyway. Alvarez took him down immediately but never once tried to do anything but get position and hold him down. He got side control and then a full mount, but still did nothing on offense but hold his position until 15:50 when Sakata finally got away. The place went nuts at this point. Sakata got a momentary takedown but Alvarez quickly reversed it and was caught in the guard. And there they stayed until time expired. Sakata was working for submissions in the final moments from the bottom and if there had been no time limit may have eventually won. After the match ended, Sakata got up and complained that Alvarez was doing something illegal. It appeared he was signaling manipulating joints, and kicked him in the chest, and everyone at ringside pulled them apart. 5. Ricardo Morais beat Hiromitsu Kanehara by decision after 20 minutes. Morais is 6'8" and 3/4 and 279 pounds and ripped, but looking far more artificial than Karellin. Kanehara is 5'6" and weighed 211, so there was another size mismatch. You pretty well got the idea that Rings booked its Japanese fighters in these ridiculous size mismatch matches, so if they lose, it's okay because they were fighting someone much bigger, and if they were to win, it would get them over big. Morais got behind him and then wound up on top but caught in the guard. He punched from the top and was more aggressive than Alvarez. Kanehara was far more skilled but was giving away far too much size and knew he couldn't stand with the bigger man because of the incredible reach difference, nor could he take him down, so he wound up eating a lot of leather. Kanehara escaped a few times and tried ankle pick takedowns but couldn't get them and was caught underneath every time. Even when Morais got behind Kanehara, he never worked for a choke. He'd punch Kanehara, who would turn his back. Kanehara got a momentary top position but was quickly reversed before the finish. Kanehara, who swells easily, had his eye pretty swollen up by the end of the match. Not much happened but people were into the drama of it. 6. Kiyoshi Tamura beat Valentijn Overeem in 6:08. This was finally, 1 year later, the rematch to Overeem's upset in a shoot last year. Rings didn't make the same mistake as this was a work but one hell of a stiff work. Overeem, who is 6'3", was down to 193. He was 220 last year, and looked skinny. It appeared Overeem actually knocked Tamura out momentarily early with a palm heel. Tamura's mat work on the ground was out of this world, with the quick spinning moves into submissions made more impressive because he was working with a guy with virtually no experience doing works. Overeem put Tamura down a second time with a kick and a knee, and it appeared the knee knocked Tamura's tooth out. Tamura kept feeling for the missing tooth. Overeem got a half crab but Tamura escaped and turned it into an armbar for the submission. 3.5 stars. 7. Alexander Karellin beat Akira Maeda via 2-1 score after 2 5-minute rounds. Maeda came in at 257 and was in the best shape he'd been in years, but the stories of him being 285 with 5% body fat were a joke. I doubt his body fat would have been below 15%. Maeda threw 3 low kicks to set up a missed high kick. Karellin then simply manhandled him, throwing him around where he hurt his neck early. It wasn't a takedown attempt by Maeda as much as Maeda trying to just get low to avoid being thrown, and Maeda maneuvered near the ropes so a stand-up was ordered. He went back to leg kicks and went for a spin under, but was caught underneath. Karellin did try some weak attempts standing at throwing slaps, but there was no way he could stand and strike with Maeda and look believable whether work or shoot. Karellin took him down with a front headlock, but Maeda got a leg trip and the ankle lock at 2:48 for the rope break point. That didn't look believable. A few more leg kicks before Karellin just throw him down. He executed the Karellin lift at 3:56. There was superheat for the spot, and when Maeda came back throwing some knees before being taken down again. At the end of the round, Maeda looked like he was one step from collapsing. So then he got the takedown to begin the second round and was reversed into the first headlock choke. Karellin took him down a second time and kept trying to maneuver different version of wrist locks. Karellin got his second point at 2:39 of the round with another cranking headlock. Karellin also delivered Maeda's favorite captured suplex. Maeda tried a spin under and got caught underneath again. Karellin tried a second Karellin lift but barely got Maeda off the ground. Maeda had to be helped to the back. The match was a lot better than you'd think, but part of that was due to the crowd heat because Karellin just looked like a more powerful version of the typical lost huge European amateur wrestlers that are brought in for this group. 2.25 stars. Going in, there was little question some type of story would come out of the proposed Rey Misterio Jr. vs. Psicosis mask vs. mask match scheduled for February 25th in Tijuana. With Misterio Jr. having lost his mask at Super Brawl 4 days earlier, by the standards of Mexican wrestling, it made the match a fraud. There had been mainstream pub in Tijuana, largely started by rival promoter Antonio Pena, but also in the nation's largest sports newspaper, Ovaciones, by writer/broadcaster Dr. Alfonso Morales, pointing out even before Super Brawl that Misterio Jr. would lose the mask on the WCW event before the Tijuana event. By the time the event came around, it had made the news locally about what happened in Oakland, including photos and clips of him removing the mask. Had the event taken place in Tijuana before Oakland, it probably would have been one of the biggest events ever in the city. The day of the show, a local Tijuana newspaper reported the match would instead be a hair versus mask match because Misterio Jr. had lost his mask a few days earlier in a match in Oakland to a 7-foot giant. However, outside the auditorio the night of the show, it was still being advertised as mask versus mask. The commission wouldn't allow it to go on as a mask versus mask match since basically everyone already knew Misterio Jr. had lost his mask. For reasons of which we aren't clear, they also wouldn't allow a mask versus hair match as the fans who had read the newspaper expected. Basically, a threat was made to Psicosis that if they did the mask versus hair match, that the commission would rescind its earlier ruling and allow the AAA Psicosis, Leon Negro, to appear in Tijuana as Psicosis and no longer allow the original Dionisio Castellanos to continue under that name. The match, which drew about 4,000 fans, or about 85% full, instead turned out to be a singles match, but on next to last instead of last, for Psicosis' WWA World Welterweight title. The idea, due to everyone knowing what the original plan was to do a finish where Misterio Jr. won the title as a surprise, which is what happened. The problem is for a number of reasons, among them the resentment of the local crowd at Misterio Jr. for losing the mask in the manner he did, and also because of Psicosis' huge local popularity, Misterio Jr. was heavily booed throughout the match. He came out wearing his mask and tried to do an explanation for everything that happened, but every time he grabbed the mic, he was booed so heavily he stopped. He moved the mask and again tried to talk and again was booed out. The match turned into a major bloodbath with Psicosis blading big and Misterio Jr. having his ear badly cut from a chair shot to the point he suffered a minor injury and wound up being taken to the hospital the next day because he was had headaches and his ear was bleeding, which was partially the reason Psicosis and Conan missed the Alamodome show the next night. There was also a sketchy report of an out-of-the-ring incident later that night after a retirement party in San Diego for boxer Terry Norris where Misterio Jr. was sucker-punched after getting a lot of insults about selling out his culture by either one or two members of a Mexican gang, further damaging his ear for the injury that hospitalized him. The finish of the third fall saw Rey Misterio Sr. hit Psicosis with a chair, and then hug his nephew as if the family was getting back together. When Rey Jr. turned his back and went to pin Psicosis, Rey Sr. hit him with a chair and put Psicosis on top, but Rey Jr. kicked out of the pin, and then used a super powerbomb off an attempted top rope Frankensteiner to win the match. The match was said to have been about 15 minutes and aside from the blood and the dives, closer to what you'd expect from these two on a WCW Saturday night taping match as opposed to the kind of career performance that mask versus mask matches in Mexico sometimes turn out to be. After the match, Psicosis covered his face with a jacket and removed his mask and gave it to Misterio Jr. in a sportsmanship gesture which wasn't a planned spot beforehand and he decided to do on the spot to everyone's surprise. Psicosis had a lot of cult popularity at the show for the feeling that unlike Misterio Jr. and Juventud Guerrera, he hadn't sold out his culture by losing his mask for no reason in the United States, although the fans didn't seem to understand the reason was because they simply never got around to having him do it yet rather than one guy standing up and not selling out to the Americans. Mark Kerr, who recently made his pro wrestling debut and is generally regarded as the top heavyweight in the world of shoot fighting, added another honor to his expanding resume, capturing the unlimited weight class at the World Submission Fighting Championships February 24 to February 26 in Abu Dhabi. The second annual tournament, bankrolled by rich oil sheiks in the Middle East, brought together one of the strongest fields of any tournament of its type in history under unique rules with some strange happenings. With no striking allowed, matches generally had 10-minute time limits, of which the first 5 minutes were submission only, as in no points being kept. If no submissions took place in 5 minutes, the next 5 minutes were under a point system similar to the sport of jiu-jitsu, awarding points for takedowns and dominant positioning, side mount, full mount. If the score was tied or no points were awarded after 10 minutes, an additional 5-minute overtime period was added, in which case judges would pick a winner. In certain cases, even after the 5-minute overtime, the judges would pick a draw, in which case the fighters would do a second overtime. The championship matches expanded those time limits, so it would be 10 minutes with only submissions, another 10 for points, and if tied, the overtime period lasted 20 minutes, which wound up with one fight, in the 215-pound weight class championship match, going 40 minutes. Another strange rule is in the event of an injury to a winner, the losing competitor in that match is given the chance to replace the winner in the tournament. Kerr, who is 10-0 under MMA rules including tournament wins in both UFC and Brazil, scored wins over Carlos Barreto, a top-level jiu-jitsu and MMA star from Brazil, Josh Barnett of the United States, Chris Hazeman of Rings Australia and Sean Alvarez of Brazil to win the unlimited weight class, although failing to secure a submission. In what looked to be the most important first-round matchup going on, Kerr won via judge's decision after 15 minutes over Barreto in a world-class wrestler versus world-class jiu-jitsu fighter battle. He defeated Barnett by 6 points in the quarterfinals, Hasagawa by 15 points in the semis and Alvarez by 6 in the finals, which meant he fought a total of 55 minutes. In the superfight, last year's heavyweight and absolute champion Mario Sperry of Brazil, considered in many circles as the best submission fighter in the world, defeated Shooto World Heavyweight Champion Enson Inoue, the recent conqueror of Randy Couture, by a 16-0 score. Other champions were Jeff Monson of Matt Hume's AMC Pancration team out of Seattle at 215 pounds, beating Saulo Ribeiro, a Brazil Jiu-Jitsu fighter from the United States who was coached by Sperry in the 40 minutes marathon by judge's decision. Russian wrestler Karim Barklov at 191 pounds beating Alexander Savko by 2 points. Jean-Jacques Machado, who recently fought and lost in Shooto last year, an American from the famed Machado Brothers Academy beating Japanese Shooto fighter Kaoru Uno with a choke in 4:45 to win at 167 pounds, and famed Royler Gracie, brother of Hickson and Hoyce, winning at 143 pounds over Soca of Brazil in 33 seconds with a leglock submission. The heavyweight division was loaded with big names, with those who have dabbled in pro wrestling capturing the top 3 spots. Alvarez, who was coming off a shoot fight with Rings on the big February 21st show, finished second. Alvarez has done several matches with Rings, all of which have been shoot matches. Hasagawa, who placed third in a unique placing, is both a promoter for Rings in Australia and an undercard performer in Japan. He's probably among the most underrated workers in the entire pro wrestling business and one of the most talented for his ability to make working matches look so real. Hasagawa beat Gary Myers, who has done shoot fighting around the world and some pro wrestling on an independent level around Indiana, by 6 points in the first round before losing by 2 points to Ricardo Moraes, who also came off a shoot win on the February 21st Rings show. Moraes suffered an apparent broken ankle in his first match against Lions Den fighter Trey Teligman, Pancrase/UFC, in winning a match described as a war, by 3 points. Teligman caught Moraes in a heel hook, but Moraes refused to tap and won the match on points for getting superior positioning. Moraes taped up his heel and continued, beating Hasagawa, but the next day his ankle was badly swollen and he couldn't continue, which put Hasagawa back in the tournament, and he defeated Luis Roberto Duarte by 3 points in the third-place match. Duarte had also lost earlier and advanced when his victor, Mark Robinson, the world amateur champion in sumo as well as being judo and samba champion of South Africa, pulled out after beating Duarte in the quarterfinals. Robinson pulled out of the tournament supposedly due to a dispute between his sponsors and the promoters, although that's probably a nicer way of saying that the promoters were looking to make sure one member of Team Abu Dhabi, consisting of Alvarez and Moraes, would at least make it to Kerr in the finals. Among performers tied to either pro wrestling or MMA in the 215-pound weight class, Vernon White, former Pancrase, of Lions Den, won his first match by points over Daiju Takase of Japan, most noted for his win on the Pride show over 680-pound Emmanuel Yarbrough last year, before losing by 16 points in the semifinals to Saulo Ribeiro. Murillo Bustamante, the Brazilian who is highly respected in MMA, won his first 2 matches before losing by 5 points to Ribeiro in the semifinals and failed to continue to go for third place, instead saving himself for the Absolute Championships held later, where he ended up losing in the quarterfinals. Roberto Traven, who competed in the same UFC on the undercard in Detroit of the second Dan Severn-Ken Shamrock match, was eliminated in the second round on points by eventual champion Monson. Traven came back in the Absolute division to win, beating Shooto fighter Hayato Sakurai on points, the latter making a tremendous impression going to the finals in the Absolute division despite weighing only 160 pounds. Jerry Bolander of Lions Den beat Shang Wenyu, a member of the Chinese national judo team, with a choke in 4:05 before losing on points to Regan Machado in the second round. In one of the biggest surprises of the tournament, Ricardo Almeida of Brazil, who lost by points earlier to Bustamante but advanced when Bustamante pulled out of the third-place match to save himself for the Absolutes, choked out Machado to capture third in just 50 seconds. At 191 pounds, Akira Gono of Shooto in Japan was knocked out in the first round by points against Ricardo Liborio of Brazil. Fabio Gurgel, a noted Brazilian jiu-jitsu champ with UFC experience, won his first-round match but lost in the second round by points to Alexander Savko. Omar Bauchi of Sweden, who has fought a few times recently in Pancrase, lost via points in his first-round match to Savko. Famed Renzo Gracie, the defending champion, won his first-round match, but in upset, lost by 2 points to Egan Inoue, Enson's brother who also has fought in Rings, in the quarterfinals. Inoue, who won his first round match over Robbie Kilpatrick, Ken Shamrock's real-life brother, as Ken's birth name is Kenneth Wayne Kilpatrick, who went in with a shoulder injury via armbar in 9:25, wound up losing by points to eventual champion Barklov in the semifinals, before finishing fourth after losing by points to Liborio. Amaury Bitetti, a Brazilian best known in the US for losing a UFC war to Don Frye in one of the great matches in UFC history in Detroit, defeated Akira Shoji of the Pride organization in Japan by points in the first round before losing in the quarterfinals on points to Barklov. The 167-pound weight division was weakened when Rumina Sato, with little question the most exciting submission exponent in the world, pulled out due to being ill. Sato was in Abu Dhabi but unable to compete. Still, there were a lot of interesting matches in that weight division. John Lewis of EFC fame tapped out in his first round match to Shuto's Kaoru Uno in 8:05. Eddie Ruiz, a member of Tank Abbott's crew who has fought in Kingdom Pro Wrestling and has been considered for UFC as a lightweight, was a big surprise winning his first two matches, the second via decision over Robin Gracie. Ruiz' luck ran out from there as Uno beat him via choke in 6 minutes, and he finished fourth, losing to Sakurai's armbar in 17 seconds in the third-place match. Hayato Sakurai scored a measure of Shuto revenge, beating Andre Pederneiras by decision in the first round, since Pederneiras knocked out Sato in a Shuto match late last year. With Sato out, he was replaced by Lions Den team manager Joe Hurley, who was submitted by Fabiano Ia, who has done very well in extreme challenge events in the US, with an armbar in 39 seconds. Sakurai outpointed Iha before being tapped out by Jean-Jacques Machado in the semifinals, and then beat Ruiz for third, before going into the absolutes and taking second. That also had its controversy, as it was said he tapped out Rico Rodriguez, a heavyweight, in the absolute division clearly after the bell had rang to end the time limit, but was awarded the win anyway. Machado, who lost to Frank Trigg in a Shuto match last year at the Vale Tudo Open, beat Uno in a battle of Shuto veterans via choke in 4:45 to win the division, being the only fighter in the tournament to win every match via submission. The 143-pound division looked to go to Royler Gracie, and there were no surprises. Gracie won a decision over João Roque of Brazil, the biggest name aside from him in his weight class, in the second round. After that, Gracie easily outpointed Melkor Manabusan in the semis before beating Soka quickly in the finals. Japanese television rundown. January 31st, All Japan. 1. Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama and Jinsei Shinzaki beat Vader and Masahito Kakihara and Yoshihiro Takayama in 11:52. Focal point was Vader versus Kobashi, and it had great heat. At one point the two stars blew a vertical suplex spot as Kobashi didn't get Vader up, and the place went quiet. They went right back to the spot, and it got a big pop for the second time when they did it right. This was probably the most aggressive Vader has looked since joining the promotion, and looked good, and not in a way where he just ran over people or was being carried by others big selling to look good. Kakihara was great, although the crowd died when Takayama would tag in. He's so bad. Kobashi was laid out by a Vader bomb and a Takayama leg drop but kicked out, and then hit the desperation lariat on Takayama for the pin. 3.5 stars. 2. Yoshinari Ogawa beat Kakihara in 16:22 to retain the PWF Junior title. This was probably the best singles match I've ever seen Ogawa in, which really says something for Kakihara. These two are regular partners in six-man, so it probably helped the heat a little. The last several minutes contained one false finish after another. Ogawa did his jawbreaker into a figure four into a jackknife bridge, which is considered the hottest finisher in Japan, but Kakihara kicked out. Kakihara then did a flying armbar in the middle, but Kakihara's shoulders were down and the ref, trying to jump over in position, actually landed on Kakihara to break it. Kakihara acted pissed. It's the closest thing to an American spot in All Japan in a long time, although contextually is almost made sense. Kakihara grabbed another armbar, but while caught, Ogawa rolled into a cradle and got the pin just before tapping. Super finishing spot. 4.25 stars. February 6th, New Japan. 1. Dr. Wagner Jr. and Kendo Kashin beat Jushin Liger and El Samurai in 15:52. The final 9 minutes aired on television. Typical really good match. In this one, Wagner did a series of finishers on Samurai, including the Michinoku driver, but Liger saved. Samurai was out, so Liger had to slap him in the face to wake him up. Kashin did a reverse rolling cradle around the ring, which is one of those really cool moves that always gets a pop but somehow hasn't been used in the States in years. Owen Hart did it as a rookie in Canada, and it dates back to the 40s. Finish saw Samurai on the top rope, and Kashin leapt into the air and took him down with a flying arm bar for the submission. 3 3/4 stars. 2. Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi beat Michael Wallstreet and NWO Sting in 9:44. Nagata pretty well saved the match. Nakanishi used the torture rack, which is called an Argentinian backbreaker in Japan, on Wallstreet for the finish. 1 1/4 stars. 3. In a non-title match, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Satoshi Kojima beat Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara. They worked hard, but it was sloppy in spots. Finish saw Ohara go for the choke slam on Kojima, but he blocked it and hit a diamond cutter. Tenzan and Kojima did a sloppy version of the Pitbull Superbomb on Ohara, and Kojima pinned him in 13:37. 2 1/4 stars. 4. Kazuo Yamazaki and Kensuke Sasaki beat Keiji Muto and Hiro Saito in 11:49. It was a so-so match early, but picked up with a good finishing sequence and some hot spots with Muto versus Yamazaki. Finish saw Sasaki pin Saito after a lariat. Good match, but something of a letdown for a New Japan main event. 3 stars. February 7th, All Japan. This was a show devoted to the life of Giant Baba, showing clips of Baba's most famous singles matches: Abdullah, Kiniski, Bobo, Bruno, Bruiser, Crusher, Fritz, Destroyer, Hansen, Brody, Race, Briscoe, and tag matches with Inoki and Tsuruta as his partner. Tsuruta was visibly weeping when they showed a clip of he and Baba against the Funks. This was the show that drew the all-time record rating for the time slot. For longtime fans, this show was awesome, as there isn't a lot of tape out there of the 60s stars in their prime and main event matches. February 13th, Tarowoman. This was the tape of the Japanese debut show on January 31st at Korakuen Hall. This show reminded me a lot of the glory days of the AAA promotion, where it was loaded with young talent that was hungry for reach the top, inventing moves and spots and taking the art form up several notches. Somehow I think the end result of these guys will be the same as well. They'll do some fantastic wrestling in Japan and Mexico for a few years, then as a group join WCW and be used as jobbers for 50-year-old guys who can't move. 1. Hiroyuki Kanda beat Genki Horiguchi in 9:07 with an elbow drop off the top rope. Horiguchi carried the match and was very impressive. A very good opener. 3 stars. 2. Kenichiro Arai pinned Susumu Mochizuki in 9:10 after a twisting headbutt off the top rope. Arai did mainly headbutts. As in the first match, the loser was the better of the two. Mochizuki was real impressive with his mat work, particularly maneuvering several positions into armbars. 2 1/4 stars. 3. Yoshikazu Taru pinned Stalker Ichikawa in 4:22 in a bad match. Ichikawa's ring outfit reads Stonecar, but I believe the gimmick is a stalker, and something gets lost in the translation. Ichikawa dressed up in a devil costume with a pitchfork and horns. He's a total comedy act, and his offense and selling were horrible. Taro is the only guy in this promotion with any kind of experience. He worked for War before joining this group. Fans enjoyed Ichikawa's performance. Taro won with a spinning Michinoku driver, which is a good finisher. After the match, Taru debuted his gimmick of shooting a Polaroid of his defeated foe vanquished after the match, which got over pretty good. 1/4 star. 4. Magnum Tokyo, or in the dyslexic WCW version Tokyo Magnum, and Yoshiyuki Saito and Dragon Kid beat Shima Nobunaga and Sumo Fuji and Judo Suwa in an elimination match in 45:04. This was like an ECW match in some ways, in that the guys simply don't have the experience and psychology to carry a crowd for a 45-minute match, and as good as this was, they were out there way too long. It was out of this world, and where it beats similar ECW matches is that almost every move hit picture perfect rather than sloppily executed hot moves, and because these guys are so smooth together, the transitions are much better. The audience also had more patience, so they were able to slow things down without losing the crowd. Tokyo has incredible charisma for Japan, with a parka-like ring entrance with 2 dancers in similar masks coming out. He has a total superstar aura, which I've seen from him in Mexico doing the stripper/porn star gimmick that probably wouldn't translate into the US, although his work rate would be international in scope. The women fans stick bills down his trunks during the ring entrance. Saito also has awesome potential as kind of another Ultimo Dragon type, in that his flying is smooth and looks great, and he can work on the mat as well. Dragon Kid is another Rey Misterio Jr. in the making, and having seen both at the same stage of their careers, Dragon Kid is considerably more advanced after 1 year in. Fuji and Suwa are good bases and catchers for the flying moves, but they didn't stand out like the other 4. Most would see Tokyo as the best worker in the bunch, but in reality Nobunaga is. He's been compared with Love Machine and Eddie Guerrero, having more charisma than Guerrero, although not as much as Machine, and clearly grew up watching them with his frog splash and slingshot senton into the ring moves. He's the most innovative of the bunch, as he invented several new moves over the week. Saito did some headstand spots, holding his foe in a cradle pin while holding a headstand. Tim Woods used this finisher in the 70s, although he does it one step better because he kicks the guy trying to make the save and then holds the headstand. They did a sequence where everyone did their dives. Magnum did a top rope Asai moonsault and hit his head on the Korakuen Hall riser front row and was really shaken up for a while. Match fell apart for about 2 minutes, but it got back under control. Saito did a really cool flying head scissors into an armbar spot. Fuji pinned Saito to win the first fall with a choke slam off the middle ropes. Tokyo threw Dragon in the air and he used a top rope Hurricane Rana on Nobunaga. After a choke slam, Fuji went for a second one, but Dragon turned it into a Hurricane Rana for the pin. Dragon hit Nobunaga with a 450 splash, which wasn't as crisp as Juventud Guerrera or Scorpio's, and in fact, he landed wrong and busted Nobunaga's mouth open with his knee. Magnum debuted a new version of a figure four. Dragon did his patented spot where the guy is standing and he flips off the top rope like he's doing a 450, catches him on top into a Hurricane Rana. It's aerodynamically impossible to do the move, although I think Misterio Jr. has done moves similar to that. Anyway, the ref was distracted and Nobunaga pinned him with a frog splash. Magnum pinned Suwa, I believe, with a move that started as a meltdown and ended as a greetings from Asbury Park. Nobunaga actually did a running twisting plancha clothesline over the top rope. Finish saw Magnum pin Nobunaga with a shooting star press, although on the landing, poor Nobunaga caught another knee to the face. 4 stars. February 13th, New Japan. 1. Muto and Hiro Saito went to a no contest with Masahiro Chono in a weird handicap match. This was Chono's first match back since his neck injury in September, and he got a great reaction. The booking didn't make much sense putting him in against 2 guys when he was the one coming back from an injury. Chono did take a hard whip into the guardrail. Akira Nagami, with face paint and bleached blonde hair, referred to as just Akira, did a run-in right in front of the ref and did a splash off the top on Muto. It was ridiculous for no DQ to be called, even in New Japan, especially how things turned out. Akira did a tope on Saito. Muto juiced heavy and NWO Sting and Wall Street came out and helped him to the back after Chono laid him out with several Yakuza kicks and Nagami did another splash off the top on him. So at this point it was Saito against both Chono and Akira. There was little crowd reaction to this as it was too Americanized. The ref actually went to count a pin after Nagami hit a missile drop kick on Saito and Chono went to cover him, but he kicked out. Chono put the SDF on Saito, at which point, like on Nitro, everyone looked to the back and Muto came out with his head all bandaged up. Muto got cut off quickly by a Chono low blow and knee to the groin. Chono had Muto pinned when, at this point, the ref ruled it a no contest. As you can imagine, the crowd hated the finish. Chono hit a Yakuza kick on Muto after the match and Akira counted 3 as he covered him. 1 star. 2. Wagner Jr. and Kashin beat Liger and Gran Hamada in 1541. Hamada, who is 48, did a real good job keeping up with the younger guys. I don't think there are many wrestlers in history at that age who could keep up this style. Still, Hamada is not at the level of worker due to his age as the other 3. He still pulled off his trademark spots like the swinging DDT and Hurricane Ranas flawlessly. The focus was on Liger versus Wagner to build up their title match. The finish was real weak, as Wagner used 2 Michinoku drivers on Liger and went for the pin. Hamada made the save, but I guess he wasn't supposed to and got confused because the ref counted 3 anyway. The crowd didn't like this finish much either. 3 stars. 3. Kojima and Tenzan retained the IWGP Tag titles, beating Nagata and Nakanishi in 1847. First half of the match wasn't much, particularly Nakanishi was all over the place. There was something missing a lot of the way, but the last several minutes were excellent with the near falls. Nakanishi had the torture rack in Tenzan and threw him into a stomach breaker. The crowd didn't take these 4 guys on top as a big show main event even with the title at stake. Finally the match got good enough so they grudgingly accepted it. Kojima and Tenzan did the super bomb on Nakanishi but Nagata saved. Tenzan did a diving headbutt on Nagata for a near fall. Kojima used a stretch bomb while Nagata came back with a Northern Lights suplex. Tenzan did a Michinoku driver on Nagata. Kojima and Tenzan did a stuff powerbomb on Nagata but he kicked out again. Finally Kojima used 3 lariats and got the pin on Nagata. 3.5 stars. February 17th, Toryuman. This show aired highlights from the rest of the first tour. The one notable thing is that contrary to what was reported, Every show was not a sellout, as the February 6th show in Nagoya reported as drawing a sellout. 2,459 had large sections of empty seats in the corner of the upper deck. That show drew a healthy indie crowd, but it looked closer to 1,500. For wrestling, this was one of the better television shows in a long time. 1. Dragon Kid beat Dr. Cerebro to win the vacant NWO welterweight title on February 6th. The first part of the match was pretty much so-so, with the lone highlight being Dragon doing a moonsault from the middle rope backwards over the top rope to the floor. Both men were counted out at 9-10. As you can imagine, the fans hated that, but it was a set-up spot. Ultimo Dragon at ringside ordered the match restarted. They saved all their good stuff for the second match. Dragon Kid did a perfect Misterio Jr. style springboard Hurricane Rana. Cerebro did a really good banana split while holding Dragon in the air upside down, and one more submission I've never seen before. Dragon did his backwards leap into a Hurricane Rana, but totally blew his finisher, 450 into Hurricane Rana, as he totally missed Cerebro with the first head scissors to the point it looked real bad. He went back up and did it again for the pin at 412. 2 3/4 stars. 2. In Dragon's first title defense on February 7th, he pinned Judo Suwa in 8:45. He did the same moonsault to the floor. When Taru distracted the ref, Sumo Fuji interfered and they went for a super bomb, but Dragon turned it into another Hurricane Rana. He also did a Mysterio Rana, a handspring into a Rana reversed into a Hurricane Rana. He did a Hurricane Rana off the apron but smashed his shoulder on the floor. He used the springboard Hurricane Rana for a near fall. Dragon went to the top but Taru hit him with his cane. Suwa used a superplex. Dragon went for a springboard move and slipped off the ropes and collapsed. He used another Hurricane Rana and a Dragon Rana 450 into Hurricane Rana for the pin. Excellent match except for the one botched spot leading to the finish. 3.5 stars. 3. Nobunaga pinned Tokyo in 1752 on February 5th to retain the IWRGIC welterweight title. These two worked super together and this was a match of the year candidate. Magnum did a Silver King style flip dive. Fuji and Suwa interfered and crotched Magnum on the post. Nobunaga hit a tope. All kinds of near falls. Nobunaga used the Japanese rolling crotch hold and finished with a low punch, which is becoming one of his trademark spots. He also used a running dive over the top with a full body twist. Magnum slipped off trying a springboard Hurricane Rana but ended up doing the move. He used a meltdown for a near fall. One new move after another by Nobunaga for near falls before finally getting the pin after a frog splash. Place went nuts for Nobunaga after the match. Taru came out and they held Magnum and took the Polaroid. 4.5 stars. 4. In the first round of the NWA middleweight title tournament, Magnum pinned Fuji in 8:47 with a shooting star press. 2 stars. 5. Great Sasuke pinned Grand Naniwa in 13:05 after a series of cradle reversals. Only the finish aired. They did a lot of moves but something seemed off. 6. Nobunaga pinned Sasuke the Great in 13:07 after 2 frog splashes. Nobunaga sold his knee big after the second one, using that as a reason to be eliminated from the tournament. Nobunaga looked real good, including a twisting plancha and a Quebecers cannonball type flip. Nobunaga actually made fake Sasuke look good. 7. In the tournament finals, real Sasuke pinned Tokyo in 21:51 to win the vacant NWA middleweight title. This was an excellent and very different match. To give the title meaning, they started out almost doing a cross between Ring's legit-looking style with a few basic 70s pro wrestling spots like spinning toe holds thrown in. It picked up midway through with Tokyo doing a tope and a top rope Asai moonsault. Sasuke suplexed Tokyo onto a tape over the top rope. It was one of those Japanese tables that wasn't about to break. Sasuke did a running flip dive over the top, crashing onto the table, which didn't break. They traded near falls for the next several minutes, including several spots working into La Magistral cradles. Tokyo did a Frankensteiner off the top that was reversed into a cradle for a near fall. Tokyo did a hot spot where he set up a dragon suplex, Sasuke blocked it, and he threw some Muay Thai type knees to the thigh and hit the dragon suplex. He did a meltdown into a Michinoku driver type of move, which I believe was called, believe it or not, a Viagra driver. Tokyo hit a shooting star press, but sold it like his hip and back were out writhing in pain. Sasuke hit a German suplex for a near fall before getting the win with a Thunder Fire powerbomb. 4.5 stars. February 20th, New Japan. 1. Osamu Kido beat Kengo Kimura in 7:57 with a Fujiwara armbar, Wakigatami. This was Kido's 30th anniversary match and it came off like a Legends match since it was slow and old style, but the fans appreciated seeing the guys do their 80s moves. 1/2 star. 2. Brian Johnston and Kazuyuki Fujita beat Don Frye and Dave Beneteau in 5:31. These guys have been around so much on big shows now that their shooter aura is gone and they are starting to be seen more as not very good pro wrestlers. Fans actually laughed at an exchange between Johnston, who clearly has the look and potential, and Beneteau, who is really green. Frye and Johnston traded stiff punches to the point Johnston was swollen above his eye. Johnston ended up getting the fall on Beneteau with an ankle lock. 3/4 star. 3. Liger retained the IWGP Junior title, pinned Wagner Jr. in 27:06. Only the last 10 minutes aired, so the match may have lacked something on television without seeing the build. What aired was good and basically what you'd expect, but it was a notch below most junior title matches. Wagner used a Michinoku driver on Liger on the ramp but was careful in protecting him. Wagner got several near falls and even a near countout win as Liger barely beat the 20, using a BT bomb similar to Outsider's Edge, and a throat drop when catching Liger on his shoulders attempting a Rana. Liger scored the pin after a brainbuster off the top rope. 3.25 stars. 4. Chono and Akira beat Muto and Tenzan in 13:39. They started brawling on the ramp with Akira giving Tenzan an enzudri and Tenzan taking a bump off the ramp into the crowd a la Cactus Jack. Chono didn't do much besides punch, kick and low blow, but did do his SDF and a shoulder block off the ropes. Kojima came back and sold the knee. Muto juiced early. Akira wrestled well, but he lacks charisma and he's really a junior heavyweight. He's probably good as far as being Chono's new regular tag partner since he can carry the match. Finish saw Chono make Muto submit to the War Special, which is a double armlock somewhat similar to the Rings of Saturn, actually about the same thing since Saturn learned the move working for War when Tenryu used it as his finisher. 2 stars. Mexico. EMLL drew its biggest crowd since September on February 26 at Arena Mexico with the vacant CMLL tag titles at stake in the rematch from February 5 where Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. regained the belts, beating Negro Casas and El Hijo del Santo before an estimated 13,000 fans. In the third fall, Santo eliminated Scorpio with a camel clutch, but then Santo accidentally hit Casas with a tope when Salvaje moved. Scorpio Jr. interfered, shaking the ropes, causing Santo to fall and be pinned by Salvaje, leaving it as a singles match. With both refs distracted, Scorpio Jr. kicked Casas low and Salvaje pinned him. It was reported in the newspapers that there was so much heat in the crowd for the finish that there was a near riot, and once they got Scorpio Jr. and Salvaje into the dressing room, they wouldn't allow them to leave until the incensed crowd went home early the next morning. On television, it was noticeable, all kinds of debris being thrown into the ring. 2 days later, EMLL released a press release saying that Casas and Santo have challenged Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. to a mask and hair versus mask and hair match which could sell the place out. No date was announced for this match. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. underwent his spinal surgery on February 27. There was some newspaper speculation that Rayo may never be able to return to wrestling after the surgery. Perro Aguayo and Perro Aguayo Jr. regained the Mexican national tag team titles, beating Cobarde and Cobarde Jr. on March 1 in Nuevo Laredo. All Japan. The annual Champion Carnival tournament was given a new twist this year. It'll be broken down into 2 groups, which will be split along the lines of the tag team partners, so that Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa will be in different groups, same with Vader and Stan Hansen, Kenta Kobashi, and Jun Akiyama, etc. So unlike previous years where basically every singles match imaginable among the top stars takes place on the tour, this will have many matches protected and not take place like no Vader versus Hansen for example, and with less matches against the top guys, they'll protect more wrestlers from doing jobs. The winner of Group A will face the winner of Group B for the championship on April 16 at Budokan Hall. The tour starts with Korakuen Hall shows on March 26 and March 27, with other big shows on March 28 at Nagoya Aichi Gym, March 29 in Fukui, March 30 in Kanazawa, March 31 in Niigata, April 2 in Okayama, April 4 in Hiroshima, April 5 in Hakata, April 8 in Osaka, April 9 in Shizuoka and April 11 at Korakuen Hall, with the final show before the finals on April 14 in Morioka. Very little of major consequence this week building to the March 6 Budokan Hall other than Vader doing his first job on February 28 in Yamato. It was a return tag match with Misawa and Akira Taue versus Vader and Hansen, drawing just 1,300 fans, ending with Taue scoring a clean pin on Vader to set up their Budokan singles match after a high kick coming off the top rope. It was Vader's first clean loss in Japan since January 4, 1996 in the Tokyo Dome match against Antonio Inoki. February 14, TV did a 4.3 rating and February 21, TV did a 3.4. New Japan. 3 matches were announced for the April 10 Tokyo Dome, which on paper is looking really weak. Instead of going with Masahiro Chono challenging for the IWGP title on top as things seem to be building, they are instead having Keiji Muto versus Don Frye. Frye will be pushed hard in March with singles matches against Kazuyuki Fujita, Manabu Nakanishi, Gerard Gordeau, on a UFO show, and even Tatsumi Fujinami. The other 2 matches announced were that Genichiro Tenryu and Fujinami would form a Legends tag team to challenge for the IWGP tag titles, against the winner of the Shiro Koshinaka and Kensuke Sasaki vs Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Satoshi Kojima match on March 22 in Amagasaki, and Alexander Otsuka and Yuki Ishikawa from Battle Arts facing Kazuo Yamazaki and Fujita. Probably 3 other major matches are to be announced: an explosive barbed wire match for the first time ever in a New Japan ring involving Atsushi Onita, probably against Sasaki, plus singles matches with Shinya Hashimoto returning and also a Chono match. Because of tradition, New Japan has always sold out or come close to it on the January 4th Dome show, but the second Dome show of the year has run into problems if the lineup isn't great. Lineups for the major shows on the next tour are: March 3rd in Niigata has Jushin Liger and El Samurai vs Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto, Brian Johnston and Kazuo Yamazaki and Fujinami vs Fujita and Nakanishi and Yuji Nagata, Koshinaka and Sasaki vs Muto and Kojima and Chono and NWO Sting and Akira vs Big Titan and Hiro Saito and Tenzan. March 11th in Kyoto has Dr. Wagner Jr. and Kendo Kashin and Liger vs Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Otani and Kanemoto, Tadao Yasuda and Fujinami vs Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara, Nagata and Koshinaka vs Johnston and Yamazaki, Nakanishi and Sasaki vs Kojima and Saito and Muto, and Tenzan vs Chono and NWO Sting. March 17th in Hiroshima has Wagner Jr. and Kashin vs Otani and Takaiwa, Nagata and Yamazaki vs Kojima and Muto, Nakanishi and Sasaki and Koshinaka vs NWO Sting and Akira and Chono, Fujinami vs Frye and Liger vs Kanemoto for IWGP Junior title. March 20th at Nagoya Rainbow Hall has Liger and Masakazu Fukuda vs Otani and Takaiwa, Fujita vs Johnston, Koshinaka vs Tenzan, Nagata and Sasaki vs Muto and Kojima, Yamazaki and Fujinami vs Akira and Chono, Frye vs Nakanishi and Wagner Jr. and Kashin defending IWGP Junior tag titles against Samurai and Gran Hamada. And the tour ends March 22nd in Amagasaki with Wagner Jr. and Kanemoto vs Otani and Takaiwa, Liger vs Kashin, Fujinami and Tenryu vs Nagata and Nakanishi, Frye vs Fujita, Muto and Saito vs Akira and Chono and Tenzan and Kojima defending IWGP tag belts against Koshinaka and Sasaki. Other Japan notes. The top matches announced for the March 14th UFO show in Yokohama is Dan Severn defending the NWA title against Naoya Ogawa, Don Frye vs Gerard Gordeau, and a return match with Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama, vs Alexander Otsuka. According to NWA President Howard Brody, the deal with Severn going to UFO and Antonio Inoki joining the NWA was not brokered through Hiro Matsuda, who is his business partner on other ventures, but the intermediary in this case was Victor Quiñones, who is an NWA board member. He said it was a multiple show deal, more like 6 shows than the 3 reported, and that the money figure reported here of $35,000 per shot could work out to be higher based on incentives. Brody said they will push the NWA in Japan and sell NWA merchandise at the shows where Severn will appear, and that they will try and get NWA promoters to book UFO wrestlers in the US. He said that while it was talked about and proposed by Dennis Coralluzzo to make Doug Gilbert the NWA champion, that was never voted on by the board. Coralluzzo said that when he proposed to Brody about making Gilbert champion that Brody had agreed to it, saying he could get the votes. Brody said the Inoki deal came up and was agreed on quickly, but that the final approval of the deal wasn't done until the board voted on it and passed it. He said Coralluzzo was the only board member who didn't like the deal, but that he eventually voted to approve it. Brody claimed that Severn only had a verbal deal with IWA and it wasn't in writing. He said that Tony Rumble resigned from the NWA board, but not the NWA, because of not wanting to take sides among the political infighting between Brody and Coralluzzo, and not so much over his group losing control of the tag team titles, which Brody said the board actually voted on and agreed to back in October. He also said that they proposed an idea to WWF months ago where the NWA would put up $1 million for Severn to challenge Bill Goldberg to a match on Raw, but that the WWF wouldn't agree to it. He felt that Severn doing jobs everywhere for Steve Blackman had hurt the title and that they needed something big to rebuild it when the Inoki deal came along. Although there had been a lot of speculation that the April 29th Pride show would be headlined by Nobuhiko Takada vs. Royce Gracie, Pride made an announcement that Takada's opponent would be a well-known American wrestler with an MMA background who is far more powerful than Gracie. People are speculating on Mark Kerr since he works for that organization and fits that description, but I don't see the upside to that at all. JWP has changed the name of many of its wrestlers. Tomiko Sai is now Akuto Sai. Erika Watanabe is now Maya Hashimoto. Rieko Amano is now Carlos Amano. Yasuko Kuragaki is now Tsubasa Kuragaki. Kanako Motoya is now Misaki Kana. And Tomoko Kuzumi is now Hyuga Azumi. Azumi captured the tournament to determine the number one contender for the JWP title on February 24, beating Devil Masami, and then won the title from Hikari Fukuoka on February 28 at Korakuen Hall. It was to be Fukuoka's final title defense, win or lose, as she's retiring on March 28 at Korakuen Hall in a six-man tag. Shadow WX captured the Big Japan Death Match title from Abdullah the Butcher on February 28 at Korakuen Hall. FMW is doing a big show on March 19 at Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center headlined by Hiromichi Fuyuki defending his unified titles against Mr. Ganasuke, plus an All-Japan All-Asian Tag title match with Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki defending against Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda, and two interpromotional matches with All Japan's Masato Fuchi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi vs. Koji Nakagawa and Gedo, and Mayumi Ozaki of the Oz Academy vs. Kaori Nakayama. They also look to be doing a tag team tournament in April with Hayabusa and Fuyuki, who turned babyface this past week, Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya, Tanaka, and Kuroda, Yukihiro Kanemura and Haido, Nakagawa and Gedo, Hideki Hasaka and Super Leather, plus an American team and a Battle Arts team. On February 27 at Korakuen Hall, after Tanaka beat Kuroda, he got on the mic and asked for Kuroda to be his partners to challenge Hayabusa and Shinzaki for the All-Asian Tag titles. In a tag match with Ganasuke and Hasaka vs. Hayabusa and Oya, it wound up with Oya turning on Hayabusa and Fuyuki turning face to make the save for Hayabusa to feud with Ganasuke. Urgent will be doing a trios tournament starting on March 6 and ending on April 3 in Kobe with Mariko Yoshida and Mikiko Futagami and Reggie Bennett, Rita Mata and Michiko Omukai and Yumi Fukawa, Candy Akutsu and Ayako Hamada and Mika Akino and Ija Kong and Mary and Fabia Pachi. In a Battle of Hill teams on March 14 at Korakuen Hall for AJW, they'll have Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoto of Neo Ladies against SAP's INT. Two more matches were announced for the March 10 LLPW vs. AJW show at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym, a lumberjack match with Eagle Sawai vs. Zap T, and a judo jacket match with Junko Yagi, a former judo champion, versus Kaoru Ito. Zap I, working without the gimmick under her real name Kendo Nagasaki, is promoting a show on April 4 at Tokyo Komazawa Olympic Gym with himself and Yoshiaki Fujiwara versus Tarzan Goto and a mystery partner on top. Michinoku Pro opens its first tour since the split on March 3. There will be some form of a World Mask Tournament. Fantastique from Big Japan will defend his Big Japan Junior title on an MPW card on March 20 against Zoro from Mexico, while March 28 in Sendai has Great Sasuke making the first defense of the NWA middleweight title against Judo Suwa. Super Delphin CMLL Tour has been drawing poorly. It opened on February 24 at Korakuen Hall before a crowd announced as 850 but looked to be less than half that for a tour which included Olympico, Rincor Latino, Zumbito, Rafael Salcero, Halcon Negro Jr., Oriental, Ultimo Guerrero and Super D. Moken from Mexico. Tsubasa and Oriental became the first CMLL Japanese National Tag Team Champions, beating Guerrero and D. Moken on the first night of the tour. February 27 in Nagoya was Delphin retain his CMLL welterweight and UWF Super Welter belt over Olympico. Delphin looks to be starting another company called Osaka Pro Wrestling in early May. Here and there. East Coast Wrestling Association ran its annual Super 8 tournament, patterned after the classic Super J Cup shows in Japan, on February 27 in Wilmington, Delaware. Steve Bradley beat Christopher Daniels in the finals of a tournament that also included Ace Darling, Jeff Peterson Matt, and Jeff Hardy Devon Storm, and Christian York. Stampede Wrestling is scheduled to do a television taping on April 2 at the Pavilion in Calgary, the site of weekly live shows for generations, as well as a April 3 date in Edmonton at the Agricom with Davey Boy Smith, Jim Neidhart, Big Titan and Tatanka as the biggest names announced.
Bruce Hart will be the on-TV commissioner.
Buddy Rose made some press in the Northwest and actually nationally as being the former tag team partner of Jesse Ventura, being one of 4 men posted on February 25th on the website of the Department of Social and Health Services for being deadbeat dads. The story said Rose, real name Paul Pershman, owes ex-wife Lynette Pershman, who works in Minneapolis as a lab technician, $36,620. The two had a daughter born in 1977, and she moved back to Minneapolis. They were living in Oregon, where Rose was the territory's top wrestling star, when she was 3 months old, and Rose never paid any child support or alimony. The story said that Lynette Pershman said she had remained friends with Ventura and his wife and had little hope of recovering the money owed. Vern and Greg Gagne are looking at putting together a TV show airing AWA matches from the past in the Minneapolis market for a Saturday morning time slot. Boyd Pierce, a name familiar to many older fans for his announcing and charming personality working gimmick tables in Texas and Mid-South wrestling seemingly forever, and noted for his wild outfits, is bedridden due to the effects of cancer and diabetes. RF Video opened up a new pro wrestling shop at the Palisades Center in West Nyack, New York, about 30 minutes from Manhattan this past week. They also have an autograph session with Rob Van Dam and Bill Alfonso on March 13th at the Neshaminy Mall in Philadelphia at noon, and are doing a weekly radio talk show on 1490 AM from noon to 1 p.m. in the Philadelphia/Trenton area. Ron Garvin, 54, is scheduled to return for Tennessee Mountain Wrestling on March 13th in Knoxville, teaming with Tim Horner against Dirty White Boy and Jeff Anderson in the main event. Ultimate Wrestling Federation on March 13th in Oceanside, California at the Roller Rink has Christopher Daniels and Mondo Guerrero. Ring Around the Northwest reported in its latest issue the death of Bud Rattle at the end of January at about the age of 68. Rattle helped start Don Muraco's career in Vancouver. World League Wrestling, the group that ran TV out of Springfield, Missouri and used Harley Race and Gordon Soley, appears to have folded. The Money Men wanted to add POW and BAM graphics to the show like in the campy Batman television show in the 60s. On the Memphis TV show on February 27th, Mike Tierney joined Randy Hale's syndicate. They will be running on March 5th in Memphis at the New Daisy Theater, headlined by a Bad Street match with Baldo and Hales versus Brandon Baxter and Michael Hayes, plus Jerry Lawler and Stacy versus Sean Stasiak and Mrs. Stasiak, Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor versus Bill Dundee and Ricky Morton. Venom vs. Streak in a kendo stick match, Coco Ware vs. Kid Wicked and Aaron O'Grady vs. Vic Grimes in a barbed wire match. In the latest soap opera, Sean Stasiak said that Stacy was right and that his sister Terry was a slut and a tramp, and showed pictures of her with Jerry Lawler at a motel. Stasiak's mom then showed up and ran down Lawler and Stacy until Stacy called her a blue-haired old bag. The Mrs. Stasiak character hit Corey Macklin 3 times with her purse in the brawl. Baldo announced he was forfeiting his Young Guns title since he now had the Power Pro title, and gave his title to Hales. Kid Wicked challenged Hales for the title. The song Bad Street USA played, and earlier Hayes had done a taped interview telling Hales he might be there. Hayes wasn't there, but Baxter came out, which allowed Wicked to hit a neckbreaker and win the title. TV main was Lawler and Streak versus Christopher and Stasiak, ending in a DQ when Mrs. Stasiak attacked Lawler, and then Stacy made the save for Lawler, so I guess they're back together. PPW is having competition in Memphis with a group called Kick-Ass Wrestling, which airs 1 hour earlier on Channel 30 in Memphis and also runs the New Daisy Theater but tapes TV on Wednesday nights, for Saturday airing, at the Mardi Gras nightclub, doing a total garbage wrestling show with names like Ackley Holic, a ref who drinks beer while he works, Izzy High and manager Shroom, Stony McGraw, and the Weed Team, along with name area wrestlers like Tracy Smothers, JC Ice, Stephen Dunn, and Brickhouse Brown. Interesting that the letter from Tom Burke ran in the March 1st Observer, where he mentioned the NWA nearly disbanding in 1961, and in the March 2nd Weekly Pro Wrestling magazine they had a story on that subject. Fred Kohler wrote a formal letter to Sam Mushnick recommending disbanding the organization on November 1, 1961, called a board meeting on November 12 at his offices at the old Marigold Arena in Chicago. Apparently the story behind it was that Harold, Sonny, Myers had sued the NWA for blacklisting him, and the suit was going to trial on November 13 in Des Moines. Myers won the suit. The story also had letters from Mushnick and Houston promoter Morris Eagle arguing against dissolving the NWA, which wound up failing to pass in a board vote. Greg Valentine is headed to NWA Worldwide as a babyface for a match this coming week with Bart Sawyer in Nashville. A group called UWA has struck a cable television deal in England, which would be the first English-based promotion to have television in about 10 years. The TV starts in May with the first taping on April 11th, which will include Tiger Mask from Michinoku Pro, and they are attempting to get 2 women from All Japan Women. ECW was contacted about people like Sabu and Rob Van Dam. Paul Heyman said he heard from the group last week and is waiting to hear a proposal from them, but no deal has been made as of yet. The Roller Jam episode where Little Richard Brown actually shot on J.R. Widener after Widener double-crossed him on a spot airs on March 5th and March 6th, which shows how many weeks ahead these games are taped. MMA. Ken Shamrock did a lengthy interview on the Fight World Video magazine, which was actually shot at the last UFC, talking about his potential return and the reality of pancreas.
Shamrock said when his WWF contract expires this year, he wants to do 1 year back in the UFC when he's young enough. He just turned 35, and then go back to the WWF, and said he didn't want to be like Marco Ruiz or Dan Severn, in reference to still fighting near the age of 40.
He made it clear he wants Boss Rutten. He said of Hoist Gracie that he didn't get complete retribution against him but got enough in their second match that he's able to live with it, but is still frustrated that he didn't finish Gracie off in their rematch, which he said was going according to his plan, but he didn't finish him off in time. I didn't get the job done, and that'll always be with me. Always. When talking about Rutten, Shamrock said that Rutten talked about his 2 losses to Shamrock in Pancrase in 1994 and 1995, saying they were early in his career.
Shamrock said that both started real fights at the same time in 1993 with Pancrase, which was the first true shoot organization, Rutten coming from kickboxing and Shamrock from pro wrestling, and when they fought they had equal experience.
He mentioned Pancrase asked him to put Rutten over for the title in their second fight and he refused, but said he'd agree to put a Japanese fighter over, Minoru Suzuki, but not a foreigner for the title.
He said Pancrase was like rings, some shoots and some works. He said UWFI had no shoots and felt you can't mix shoots and works.
He said WWF tried with the Brawl for All and the people didn't like it. He admitted his Pancrase match with Matt Hume was a work and both wanted it to be because Hume was a lot smaller, and he's the one who booked him to Japan and taught him, and neither wanted to beat up the other one.
He said Pancrase started as all shoots, but they started doing some works when too many fighters got injured, since he broke Rishi Yanagisawa and Yoshiki Takahashi's ankle, which led to banning heel hooks, and broke Takahashi's jaw twice. He said Rutten was very possibly telling the truth when he said he'd never done a worked match in Pancrase because he said all he can say is he was asked twice. He said he didn't know if Rutten was ever asked. He said his loss to Severn in Detroit was an embarrassment, saying he wasn't physically or mentally ready to fight. He said he was injured most of his last year in UFC and fought at too heavy a bodyweight, said if he came back he'd fight at 215 to 217.
He said in regard to injuries that his joints are in better shape now, even though his body has taken a lot of punishment in pro wrestling. He said it's a different kind of punishment.
The reality is that unless a cable breakthrough is made, and there are no indications that is on the horizon, there is no way UFC can afford to pay Shamrock anywhere near what it would be worth for him to give up a year of pro wrestling based on what he's earning in WWF, even if he really wants to do it again.
K1 is doing a secondary show on March 22nd in Tokyo Yoyogi Gym, headlined by Peter Aerts vs. Jim Mullen. Mullen fought in a UFC, losing to Scott Ferrozzo a few years back. The big draws on the show are Hiromi Amada, a former Japanese amateur boxing champion debuting, and pro wrestler Yoji Anjo, who faces Duncan James. In the World Tough Women's Contest pay-per-view show on February 27th, Becky Levi, the unbeaten MMA competitor who trains with Dan Severn, lost to Lisa Hunt by decision. Hunt, from Amarillo, who is much smaller, holds a USWF light heavyweight women's title belt, but this was basically under boxing rules.
Hunt went to the finals and lost to Dottie White, although that was a controversial decision.
ECW. The ECW deal with Buena Vista TV was mentioned by Phil Mushnick this past week in the New York Post in a negative light as far as a Disney company being involved with the ECW product. Mushnick called ECW as sleazy and pornographic as the WWF. Paul Heyman said he wouldn't argue the word sleazy, but would argue the word pornographic. Mushnick noted that since ECW airs generally late at night, it doesn't have a large kids audience like WWF, but noted its pay-per-view shows start at 5 p.m. on Sundays on the West Coast. There were still at least 2 checks that bounced this past week, but that could be a timing problem, with the new loan money making it into the company bank account. ECW reportedly received a $750,000 loan from Quantum Financing last week using the $960,000 it has yet to receive for revenue from the previous 2 pay-per-view shows.
When all the pay-per-view money comes in, ECW will eventually receive another $60,000, so it's a 16% loan on basically a short-term, 3 months turnaround. They also are negotiating video games deals with Take-Two Interactive, who came up with a high bid when the video rights were put up. There were no shows over this past weekend.
The weekend television opened with 13 minutes of recapping the Dudleys' angle from the previous week with New Jack and Mr. Mustafa. There was way too much time spent on the peace-burying Public Enemy, and the recap could have been just as effective in 1/3 the time. Super Crazy and Yoshihiro Tajiri's match from Queens aired. They were rushing through their spots like WCW luchadores, who are still enthused, told suddenly that their 8 minutes has cut to 3 minutes. It was a 7-minute sprint, but it was a fantastic sprint, including Crazy doing the Takamichinoku moonsault, where he switches positions on the ropes and then moonsaults out of the ring, with Crazy ending up winning. In the ring, there is nothing in the US that can touch these two, but the trick is to give them a storyline that would make people care about it, to where these two can elevate their positions through their work. Sabu wrestled Skull Von Crush. Sabu is looking amazingly like the Sheik as he ages. Von Crush's gimmick, bald-headed German, is like 25 years out of date, but he's a solid worker.
It's hilarious seeing a guy doing a German gimmick also do Val Venus-like gyrations. There was a plant holding a Sabu Fears Taz poster, and Sabu went nuts on him, bloodying him up with repeated spike shots. The angle was dumb because nobody in the crowd believed it for a second once security stood by and did nothing, reacting like it was an angle, allowing Sabu to continue with spike shots for a long time. It was one of those WWF matches that didn't have an ending. Sabu put Von Crush through a table and got on the mic and challenged Taz. Since Sabu never talks, the crowd popped big when he opened his mouth. Sabu and Taz did an immediate pull-apart, which the crowd booed. The show ended with the second part of the Shane Douglas/Tommy Dreamer vs. Lance Storm/Just Incredible angle. Storm did an interview talking about his new manager, and they showed Don Callis in the upper deck, and Joey Styles acted like it was him. Storm said his new manager was Beulah McGillicuddy, and Tammy Lynn Bitch came out after all the surgery. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. Isn't that stuff supposed to have the opposite result? It ended with all 4 wrestlers involved and Francine giving Jason the spear, taped before Jason broke his neck. WCW. Lineup for the uncensored pay-per-view show on March 14th from Louisville will be Hogan vs. Flair in a cage match with no door and a barbed wire ceiling. No word on whether or not this will be a title match, but there is a lot of sentiment that the time is right to get the belt off Hogan. Scott Hall vs. Booker T for the U.S. title, Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Kevin Nash, Barry Windham and Kurt Hennig vs. Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko for the tag titles, but originally this was to be a non-title stipulation match with belts involved, which is why they did the interview last week saying it wouldn't give Benoit and Malenko a shot. And then, with no story of explanation, it was announced this week as a title match, Stevie Ray vs. Vince in a street fight, a 3-way match with Hawk, Sandman, Raven and Bam Bam Bigelow, and a handicap match with Jerry Flynn vs. Ernest Miller and Sonny Wanu, and probably another Chris Jericho vs. Perry Saturn match with a stipulation involving a chain. Nitro on March 1st from the Dean Dome in Chapel Hill, North Carolina drew a sellout 18,598, 17,852 paying $385,180. More questions for the week. Whenever WWF wrestlers do mainstream, it's all over Raw that week. When WCW wrestlers do, it's usually never even referred to by the announcers, let alone big features done on it. When Raw draws a huge house, the attendance is trumpeted over and over on the show. When Nitro does, it's rare any mention will be made. And on it goes. Show opened with David Flair and Tori Wilson, who with the exception of Once by Disco Inferno, has yet to be given a name, in a limo with David playing Rick's phone messages over and over trying to contact him. I hope everyone involved has figured out that Rick has to turn heel out of this, because to a kid's audience, there is little cooler than ignoring out-of-touch parents that don't get it when you ignore them. They spent the show teasing Flair was going to retire. When I was a little kid, they used to tell me about the little boy who cried wolf. I don't know why I brought that up. Scott, he's banned from doing live interviews. Steiner came out with Buff and they were toned down, and challenged Rick Steiner and Goldberg to a main event match. Nash, Luger, Disco and Liz came out with Nash asking Ray to join the Wolfpack on his cell phone, and Ray said no. Flat segment. Kidman beat Psicosis to retain the Cruiserweight title in 12:50 with a shooting star press. This was a great match. Kidman did this plancha halfway to Raleigh. All kinds of near falls with great crowd heat. Arn Anderson confronted David Flair and Tori Wilson.
This was another segment that made the Horsemen look so old and dated and like lecturing parents. Anderson is still the most underutilized piece of talent in the company. By the way, did you notice that Anderson and Flair never got a rebuttal on the angle where they were made fun of? Isn't the whole idea of making fun of the faces for the faces to get mad and vow revenge later and make the people pay for later? Hogan told Vince to beat up Stevie Ray. Mysterio Jr. pinned Bigelow in 9:17 with a low blow and a Rana. Bigelow is starting to get out of shape, but he proved what a worker he was here as somehow this was actually good, and in this kind of a match that goes this long it's the big guy who has to carry it. Of course the finish got a big pop, but the crowd was into the match despite the ridiculous size difference. Bigelow did a one-arm vertical suplex. Mysterio Jr. was interviewed after the match and Nash clotheslined him from behind. Raven and Bigelow had a really good brawl backstage with Hawk running in and hitting everyone, including the cameraman, with his cane. Miller beat Flynn in 7:47. Well Placed died for this one. It took forever to set up with Flynn, who the fans saw a jobber even with his recent wins, calling Miller out. They did some hard kicks to the chest but they were out there too long and the people didn't care. They did a double knockout. The ref said first guy up wins. Flynn got up first but one who kicked him and the ref didn't see it, so Miller got up and won. Hugh Morris beat Perry Saturn in 9:25 due to help from Chris Jericho. Also too long and the crowd was totally dead. They showed about 1 billion clips from previous weeks, which these days is another surefire channel switch spot. Benoit beat Bret Hart via DQ in 1919. Not much heat. Hart didn't show much enthusiasm and I guess you can figure why. Technically they were pretty well solid on everything except Hart being in the wrong spot to take a lariat. This didn't hold a candle to the Hart-T match from the previous week and the difference was Hart, as Benoit was really good here. After going that long to end with Hart refusing to break a scorpion on the ropes for a DQ as a finish is just ridiculous. Wyndham and Hennig jumped Benoit after. The fans screamed for Flair to save. Of course he didn't, because that would make too much sense. Hogan and Nash did an interview with the rest of the Wolfpack. In the middle, Ray and Vince started fighting. Hogan said that Flair would retire. By this time nobody must have believed it since so many fans switched to Raw. Flair did an interview. The people were waiting all night for him and they went nuts. He really didn't say much. He pretty much blew off the David angle. He totally blew off the retirement deal, so evidently he didn't even want to acknowledge that storyline that the whole show was built around. He mentioned people like Michael Jordan and James Worthy and even T.J. Yavorsky, his son's wrestling coach who was one hell of a college wrestler, and danced around. Finally Goldberg and Rick Steiner beat Scott and Buff in 10:58 when Rick pinned Buff after a clothesline off the top. Buff looked great in the ring considering all he went through. The Austin Challenge angle has now been dropped completely as it was never mentioned. Goldberg did 5 press slams on Scott. Super heat when Goldberg was in, but people really didn't see that into Rick. The WWF magazine had a gossip deal saying Owen was trying to bring Bret into WWF, which was just a made-up story, but it got rumors going. Hart is telling people that when he's done in WCW, that his career will be over, and he's not considering going to WWF. There are still a lot of people who believe Hart is sincere about that, but after a few months being home, with all the angle possibilities, that he's still going to wind up there someday. He was on Mad TV on February 27th, taped February 19th on crutches claiming to have a groin injury for his arm wrestling match with Will Sasso. He ended up losing, then attacking everyone with his crutches before Roddy Piper came out of the crowd and made the save. When Abdullah the Butcher and Destroyer did the same angle in the 70s in Japan, they did incredible business for years. With WCW, since Hart and Piper are on the buried list, it's not even acknowledged on TV either before or after the angle. I guess it's for the best considering if it was, we'd have to watch Piper wrestle. Turner is starting a new cable station called Turner South and they are going to air a show called WCW Classics, showing old tapes. The press release for the station noted the show would feature some of wrestling all-time stars such as Jesse Ventura. The network is planned for cable only in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, and the Carolinas. It is being strongly discussed that Page will turn heel when he returns due to the reaction he got in San Francisco. Page has a small part in a cable TV movie called First Daughter which Jason Hervey is involved with and is being shot in Australia, which is one of the reasons he's not around right now. Gene Okerlund was on the John Boy and Billy radio show saying that Scott Hall was tipsy and staggering around the night his ankle got run over. As you can imagine, Hall is something less than thrilled about that. Some notes from the WCW Saturday night taping on March 2nd in Rock Hill, South Carolina. A very green tag team called the Soul Surfers doing a surfing gimmick got a tryout, losing to disorderly conduct. Blitzkrieg and Kaz Hayashi went to a double count out in one of the best matches on the show.
Saturn and Jericho did 2 angles.
In the first, Jericho attacked Saturn with a chain after Saturn had beaten Dandy. In the second, Saturn attacked Jericho with a chain, causing Kidman to get DQ'd against Jericho.
Mysterio Jr. over Juventud Guerrera was the best match on the taping. Joe Gomez was brought back, getting wins over Johnny Swinger and Bobby Eaton.
Conan got some office heat when he decided against announcing on the WCW show on Telemundo after the first taping.
Julio Cesar Rivera, who was the announcer for Promo Azteca in Mexico, is now doing the show with Armando Quintero, the Spanish-language voice of the Dallas Cowboys, who is said to have great potential as a wrestling announcer. The first show, which was a tape of matches from Nitro 9 days earlier, only drew a 1.9 rating and was heavily criticized in the Hispanic community since it's just a 1-hour edited version of Nitro from 9 days earlier.
Telemundo had been doing a 3.5 in that slot with regular programming, and the WWF Super Astro show on Univision has been doing national Hispanic ratings in the 6 range. They are committed for about 4 weeks of shows before the ratings will determine if it's renewed. But it's one of those things where it appears WCW just as soon have it fail, because there is nothing aimed at the Mexican market being taped at Nitro to begin with.
Jim Duggan was on television on a news show in Florida this past week saying he's gotten a clean bill of health and the cancer was all removed and is ready to return to the ring. Duggan was at Nitro on March 1st and wanted to do an interview telling the fans he was okay, but as you can see, it didn't happen. One funny thing Duggan said in his interview is that he was considered a big wrestler when he started, but now he's considered only average size. Guess he hasn't noticed that on average, wrestlers are actually getting a lot smaller due to a lot of the walls that eliminated anyone under 205 pounds from being in the business, and anyone under 235 from getting any real push, have been broken down, at least to an extent.
MTV will be filming another wrestling special and a battle royal on March 11th and March 12th in Cancun, Mexico. Hogan filmed his first episode of Suddenly Susan this past week. There is still nothing decided about when Sting will return to television or what role he'll play. He himself wants to do the white face paint gimmick from the ceiling that he used in 1997.
Then again, who wouldn't want that gig? Never wrestle.
Make $1 million a year. Everyone bumps for you.
Unless you're afraid of heights, it's the greatest job in wrestling history except the job Rodman got.
Those close to the situation are saying the odds are 80% that Jericho is going to WWF when his contract expires. If WCW loses him, it just would epitomize everything wrong with the company. House shows this week saw February 26th in San Antonio drew 14,653, paying $360,395 to the Alamo Dome, which is tremendous considering how bad the show was the last time they were there and that this was only a house show. February 27th in Huntsville, Texas drew 2,652, paying $55,100, and February 28th in Greenville, South Carolina drew a sellout 14,642, paying $366,211. Goldberg vs. Nash was originally the headline matches, but Nash pulled himself from the show, so Goldberg beat Bigelow on top instead.
San Antonio had a lot of no-shows.
Besides, Nash had pulled himself off the show a few weeks back but was still in most of the advertising. There saw a DDP vs. Hall match canceled because one was working an injury and the other really was hurt. Conan, Mysterio Jr. and Psicosis over Mysterio Jr. being taken to the hospital that afternoon. Merchandise for the week, not including the Chapel Hill show, was $209,368 or $6.55 per head.
Thunder drew one of its lowest ratings to date on February 25th with a 3.37, so a new version of Thunder drew a worse rating than a taped version of the previous week's Heat. Thunder draws a far higher percentage of 11 and under than any other WCW show, 19% this past week, but that's something of an interesting statistical reason as to why. It's because the audience of WCW's former stronghold 18 to 34 males has declined drastically. This past week's show was 32% below the average for the year in its key demo, and you can't call that anything short of catastrophic because that's an unopposed show that is being destroyed by nothing except that the shows have been so bad from a marquee perspective 3 of the last 4 weeks. The 11 and under audience for the show has just stayed steady, so it basically says under 11 kids don't know or care if the wrestling show has a lot of stars or boring matches, but males 18 to 34 do care and have been tuning Thunder out in droves. By percentage, the 11 and under audience has grown from 16% to 19% through staying the same. WCW Saturday Night on February 27th did a 2.3. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram had a negative editorial about Goldberg visiting a local school, although not criticizing him personally, saying he may rise above the scummy plot lines that will eventually ruin the family appeal of his profession. The author basically painted WCW with the same brush as WWF, using the Indiana University stuff on WWF as a reason Goldberg shouldn't be talking with elementary school kids. Jerry Rice was not only backstage at Super Brawl but on television news coverage of the event, which showed him there, really put over the athletic ability of the wrestlers.
WWF. We don't have much more detail on WrestleMania. As far as the show goes, as of before TV, the Mankind vs. Paul White match was for the winner of that match to go on to referee the main event, although TV angles may have changed that. The four-way for the IC title will almost certainly be Val Venis, Ken Shamrock, Bull-Dust, and Billy Gunn. At one point Gunn was supposed to win, although plans change often. There are reports everywhere of a six-man with Mark Henry and D'Lo Brown and Ivory versus Jeff Jarrett and Owen Hart and Deborah, although it's not definite that Henry will be back from knee surgery by that time. The Raw show on March 1st from the Gund Arena in Cleveland was the WWF's fifth straight sellout of the building, with 16,566 paying $364,153. The shotgun matches saw Test No Contest Godfather, Midian over Gilbert, Viscera over Tiger Ali Singh, and Too Much over Hardy Boys. For Super Astros it was Negro Casas over El Bandito, Scorpio Jr., a minis match and a win for Armando Fernandez. Raw opened with Vince McMahon going on and on about Undertaker and firing Kane for losing to him last week. Chyna stood up for Kane and they both beat up the orderlies that were there to take him away. Chyna told Vince she could control him, and Vince ordered a match with Austin where if Kane lost, they would both be fired. Mankind came out and said he's been screwed worse than a White House intern and wanted to ref Mankind versus Austin, but instead Vince told him he could ref at WrestleMania if he beat Undertaker on the show. A three-way for the IC title with Venis, Shamrock, and Goldust wound up with Shamrock and Goldust both counted out at 3:30 when Shamrock went berserk, seeing Goldust kissing Ryan Shamrock. I hate to say this, but Ryan must be a slut. Billy Gunn ran out and attacked Venis and posted him after the match. They said Billy couldn't wrestle due to fluid in his lungs, which may have been close to real since he had missed the entire weekend. Jim Ross came out for one of the most distasteful segments since the Melanie Pillman interview. He called out Bart Gunn and blamed him for his Bell's palsy and slapped Gunn to turn heel. There were signs everywhere welcoming him back since the word was put on the internet that he'd return on this show. Steve Williams ran in and gave Gunn a German suplexes on his head and a backdrop driver and put the boots to him. I don't know that this angle wasn't Ross' idea, I don't know that it was either, but it came off terribly. Jarrett and Hart vs. X-Pac and Triple H for the tag title was one of those matches without an ending. Great action. Shane McMahon attacked X-Pac and threw him into the steps. X-Pac chased Shane to the back. Ivory came out and chased Deborah outside the ring. The bell rang for no reason. Brown attacked Hart, and Jarrett and Ivory on the ramp ripped Deborah's robe off, leaving her in her bra and panties. Luna and Tori came out. Nobody cared. Sable came out to a big face pop, but she was dancing around more like a stripper. Tori then jumped Luna and her, and Sable doubled on her, but Sable again twice blew Tori off when Tori was looking for approval. Rock beat Road Dogg with the elbow in 4:15 of a title match. White interfered a little. Pretty good match. After the match, Road Dogg hit Snow 3 times with a chair and then hit Holly with a chair and called them both out to the parking lot. Snow said something funny, that it was Dogg's fault he did the JOB to BOB on the PPV, since the original plan for that show was for Snow to win that match over Dogg to set up a third match at Mania. Public Enemy came out dressed as the Brood, but the lights went out and Rocco disappeared. Because of The Rock, Ted Petty's ring name is simply Flyboy Rocco. Wait a minute, wasn't Rocco the dummy the Road Warriors used in one of those gobbledygooker-like stupid gimmicks of the past? So he should just be Flyboy. Holly and Dogg were brawling backstage. Droz beat Steve Blackman in 1:06 in a terrible kendo stick match. Ref Teddy Long went down. As Blackman looked after him, Droz hit him with the stick and Blackman went down. Rules were first man off his feet loses. After seeing so many ECW and Japanese matches with kendo sticks used, this was pathetic beyond belief. They went back to Holly, Dogg, and Snow brawling outside in the street and did a video showing Shane's friends talking about what a tough street fighter Shane was growing up on the mean streets of Greenwich, Connecticut while showing BMWs and Porsches on the road. It was pretty funny. Rocco was shown having been crucified. Oh yeah, it wasn't a crucifixion. It was a guy being hung with his arms outstretched covered in blood. The WWF doesn't do crucifixions. Vince came out and promised a big surprise. He was enthusiastically shaking hands with the fans. Somewhere in this he forgot the surprise.
Mankind apparently beat Undertaker by countout in 3:11, and Taker snatched Vince and the bell just rang.
He set Vince up for a choke slam on the table, but Boss Man attacked Taker with a nightstick and left him laying.
Both guys ran into the crowd and took off in the limo and left.
Taker choke slammed Mankind after. Deborah vs. Ivory went 29 seconds before PMS ran in. Jacqueline piledrove Ivory. Austin vs. Kane had a hell of a match for 13:43 without an ending. Fast-paced, very good brawling. After a ref bump by Earl Hebner, Austin hit the stunner but no ref. When Hebner started the count, Chyna pulled Austin off Kane. White came out. White threw in a chair but Austin got it and gave Kane a weak first chair shot but a better second one. He went to hit Chyna with the chair but she got away. Chyna came back with a low blow. Kane held Austin but White came in and kicked Kane when Austin moved. Austin flipped him off and left and his music played. The stip was that if Kane won, he could stay in the corporation, but if he lost, he and Chyna were fired. Since there was no finish, who the hell knows?
March 2nd in Pittsburgh, the show opened with heat tapings.
Too Much beat the Hardy Boys when DOA interfered.
The idea of the big bikers who look like they just got out of prison and the little cute young pretty boys being together probably has some sort of connotation.
Must be my imagination. Rock did an interview questioning White's loyalty to the corporation because of how he screwed up twice in the Austin vs. Kane match.
Public Enemy vs. Acolytes had no finish, but it was a one-sided squash.
PE actually got no offense in and they put Grunge through a table. Dog beat Jarrett when the Blue Blazer ran in and KO'd Jarrett and unmasked Taz Brown. Goldust and Shamrock beat Billy Gunn and Venus when Goldust pinned Venus after a superplex. Goldust and Meanie then left, taking Ryan with them while the other three continued to brawl with each other. The Kurt Angle for NBC went like this.
Tiger Ali Singh ran down Americans and offered $500 for any American who would blow their nose in the American flag.
He then pointed out Angle, calling him a local Pittsburgh hero. Angle said no.
Singh upped it to $2,000 and Angle said no.
Singh upped it to $5,000 and Angle said yes. Angle then acted like he was going to do it, but instead blew his nose in the Indian flag. Angle gave Singh a belly-to-belly suplex and a judo throw.
The pop was said to have been disappointing for Angle, said to be the reaction of a mid-level face.
They officially announced the four-way for the IC title at Mania. Bossman pinned Snow in 2 minutes. White did an interview saying Rock was paranoid and his job McMahon hired him for was to keep the belt in the corporation.
Raw started with Brown over Hart in a Chicago street fight. They used a broom and cookie sheet and brawled all over the place.
Jarrett came out and threw Hart a guitar but Brown made the interception and used it for the pin.
New Age Outlaws beat Holly and Snow when the latter team just couldn't get along and fought each other.
Snow hit Holly with the head and Billy pinned him.
They played Undertaker's music and the Ministry hit the ring and laid out all 4 guys.
Taker challenged Bossman and said before the show was over there would be a human sacrifice.
Rock called out White.
Vince came out instead and told Rock to calm down. White came out and they argued. Mankind again offered to ref their match. Vince instead said that if Mankind wanted to ref at Mania, that he'd have to wrestle Austin on TV and that White would be the ref. Austin came out and said he didn't care because he was going to win the title at Mania anyway.
Ross came out with a shopping bag and called Michael Cole to the ring.
He was mad about being fired. He pulled the red gi and the stupid mask out of the bag and said this is what the WWF creative team had planned for Steve Williams, who was one of the greatest athletes in the world. Ross said he wanted his job back and kicked Cole low and went to the broadcast position to take over. This got a huge face pop. Vince then ordered Terry Taylor to replace Cole and take the headsets from Ross. Taylor and Ross argued but eventually Williams came out and talked Ross into leaving, so Taylor and Lawler did the rest of the show. Shamrock beat Goldust, who came out with Ryan and Meanie. Shamrock scored a clean pin with the belly-to-belly, and then beat up Meanie, and while this was going on, Goldust left with Ryan. Test beat X-Pac.
Chyna tried to interfere but Triple H stopped her. Shane McMahon hit X-Pac with the European belt, allowing Test to win.
Triple H then challenged Chyna. Godfather was scheduled against Blackman, but he offered Blackman his hose and Blackman accepted. While Blackman was leaving, Droz attacked him. The Ministry came out and laid out Blackman, Droz, and Godfather. Chyna vs. Triple H never took place as Kane came out before the match started to throw a fireball at Triple H, but missed and hit Chyna. Triple H tried to protect Chyna while Kane was throwing local jobbers around. Kane did the King Kong and carried Chyna to the back. Tori vs. Luna was a backdrop for Sable to come out with Playboy. The segment saw Lawler going crazy for the photos. Tori, who wrestled years ago in LPWA and Japan as Terry Power, was portrayed as not knowing how to wrestle and wore a Sable Bomb t-shirt, so Luna just beat her up and eventually was DQ'd. Sable then beat up Tori some more after the match and ripped off her Sable Bomb t-shirt. The taping then stopped for several minutes as they set up the Undertaker symbol for the crucifixion. Fans were chanting for the Steelers while this was going on. The taping restarted and the ministry brought out Bossman and they hung him from the Undertaker symbol. Undertaker said he was going to take out the corporation one by one until only she, apparently Stephanie McMahon, will be left and he'd control her mind. Bossman got away and the ministry was beating him up and the corporation except Kane all came out and they had a big brawl with local wrestlers from Jim Miller's NWA Pennsylvania group acting as policemen as Pat Patterson ordered them to arrest Undertaker, who took several of them out before he was finally arrested, but not before he used his magical powers to set the cross on fire. The show ended with Austin vs. Mankind with White as ref. Match was okay. White played clean as a ref until the finish where Mankind had the Socko claw on Austin, who was punching him but on the apron. White did a fast 10 count for the countout finish. After the match, White choke slammed Mankind. Rock and Vince yelled at Austin, who threw Rock out of the ring to end the show. The WWF CD rose to number 10 on the Billboard charts this week, having sold another 78,598 units. The Slammin' Wrestling album was at number 114 with 11,395 sales. Entertainment Weekly reviewed both albums and the re-release of the 1985 original wrestling album and the 1993 WrestleMania albums. The reviews weren't kind, calling today's wrestling a new, disturbed universe unto itself. It called the 1985 album clearly a disposable joke, but called Jid's Grab Them Cakes the precursor to South Park's Chocolate Salty Balls. The 1993 album review ripped on the singing of Bret Hart and Undertaker, but then said the 1985 and 1993 albums did contain a certain musicality. The same can't be said of the two out today. The WWF Entrance music album was panned for low-rent production as if it were recorded in a make-your-own demo booth in the lobby of an arena. And the Slammin' album got the worst review of all, saying it had the same songs as the WWF album but in wimpier, synth-pumped arrangements, calling it a lower grade of cheese. Rock is featured in the current issues of Ebony and Game Pro magazines. Kurgan is in an Eminem video. Sable was charging $85 at an autograph session for her autograph on the Playboy issue that comes out this week. NBC Weekend Today on March 28th, Morning of Mania, will air the segment on Kurt Angle. For February 12th in England, Raw drew 400,000 viewers to 300,000 for Nitro and 170,000 for Thunder. The live post-midnight version of St. Valentine's Day Massacre drew 270,000 viewers. Vince McMahon will be speaking at Harvard Law School on April 15th. For the Sunday Night Heat show on February 28th in Dayton, Ohio that didn't air in the U.S. due to the satellite uplink problem, the show opened Chyna attacking Gillberg and challenging Triple H to a match. Too Much beat Hart and Jarrett when Brown interfered. Undertaker beat Kurgan and then said he'd own the WWF someday. Blue Dust did an interview saying that Goldust was always his hero to set up them as a combination. And what a pair they are. Droz attacked Blackman to set up their epic match the next night. Public Enemy beat Hardy Boys and were attacked afterwards by Brood. Triple H no contest Chyna when Kane attacked Triple H and eventually X-Pac made the save. Fans were very negative in their response to the Super Astros matches taped in Dayton with chants of "you suck" and "boring," even though the guys worked hard, since the fans don't react to anyone they don't see as TV stars. Told that the best match taped for TV the entire night was X-Pac vs. Sting for Shotgun, which probably doesn't speak volumes for what was taped. The weekend house shows saw February 26th at the MCI Center in Washington, D.C. drew a sellout 17,923, paying $436,212. February 27th at the Fleet Center in Boston drew a sellout 17,428, paying $348,791, and the Heat tapings February 28th in Dayton, Ohio drew a sellout 9,721, paying $206,100. Merchandise for the week was $467,839 or $7.59 per head. The house shows are all headlined by the Rattlesnake Rules matches with Austin and Mankind over Rock and Kane when Austin stuns Kane. They wind up being almost like four ways since the partners end up fighting each other. The IC title matches had that retarded finish where Shamrock uses the ankle lock to win the title from Venus, but is DQ'd after the match for refusing to break the hold. Goldust didn't work due to his back injury but was at the shows kissing Meanie. Meanie, who earlier in the shows lost to Christian, subbed for Goldust, with all the wrestlers on the roster. He's the one who works twice, and beat Snow when Goldust distracted Snow by threatening to steal the bitch with no body. Tag titles were guitar on pole matches with X-Pac and Triple H challenging, ending when X-Pac hit Hart with the guitar, but Chyna interfered, giving him a low blow and put Hart on top. Ben Lyons, who was considered the company's top live event promoter, was fired a few weeks back. There are no celebrities booked at WrestleMania thus far, but there are some booked for the WrestleMania Rage Party on March 27. Livewire did a 1.9 rating on Superstars, a 2.2 over the February 27th to 28th weekend. The latest Winnipeg Sun poll regarding pro wrestling is that 63% believe the Inside Edition reports would lead to more schools becoming wrestling-free. It appears WWF will be doing another UK-only pay-per-view show on May 16 called No Mercy. From the 19,000-seat Manchester Evening News Arena. The Reader's Pages. Off the Record. I've enjoyed TSN's Off the Record program ever since it started, especially due to its respectful treatments of my favorite athletes, pro wrestlers. Recently, however, I've been very put off by the show. It has become host Michael Landsberg paying homage to a godlike Vince McMahon. I understand Raw is TSN's bread and butter. The show has to promote wrestling and can't actually cover it by talking about real issues. But the level of sucking up to Titan makes me nauseous. I hope I'm not the only one. A recent edition saw Sable, WWF Canada President Carl DeMarco and some internet mark as guests. It was a 30-minute long vomitous exercise. Sable started talking about how surprised she was when her friend Luna turned out to be Spider Lady, and that she hoped to gain her revenge at the Royal Rumble. And this is a woman who wants to be taken seriously? Doesn't she know that it's practically law that after that many boob jobs, nobody could ever take anyone seriously? The Mark then talked about how great it was that the WWF has brought back women's wrestling. Get a clue? Sable is not a wrestler. In her contract it specifically states that she doesn't have to take bumps. In my opinion, wrestlers take bumps. Sable and Hulk Hogan are not wrestlers, and if Shawn Michaels returns, he wouldn't be either. The Mark also brought up that the character of Stone Cold Steve Austin was, in fact, the real-life Vince McMahon. McMahon is ballsy, doesn't take crap from anyone, flips the bird to his opposition, etc. I realize Vince McMahon and Mr. McMahon are different people, but this guy talked about how McMahon took the unjustified bad feelings toward him and used them. Sure, he was smart to make himself a strong heel after the Bret Hart match rather than disappear until the heat went away. But didn't Eric Bischoff do the same thing earlier? If McMahon was such a genius, wouldn't he have figured out by now how to promote light heavyweights? Wouldn't he know at which point to stop filling his roster with giant sloths? Wouldn't he be able to see both sides of issues rather than just his own? McMahon has to copy someone else's ideas to succeed. Just like Bischoff. He just copies better. I realize that Landsberg is smart, so he must know Vince gave him the exclusive of admitting he lied to Bert in Montreal wasn't because Landsberg was so prepared that he backed him into a corner, but because he wanted to admit it on that show at that time. Maybe Landsberg feels he owes Titan for giving him that exclusive and now kisses ass in such a big way. In an article in the Canadian version of TV Guide, Mick Foley was quoted as saying that Vince admitted 2 years ago that he didn't know what the fans wanted anymore. Any review of WWF booking from 1993 through 1996 proves this. He got lucky and Stone Cold Steve Austin got hot. He didn't invent this character. His office thought Stone Cold was a reference to temperature. When it hit big, it was lightning in a bottle and he went with it all the way. Does that make him a genius? Maybe when you compare him to Eric Bischoff he is. But is that really any criterion of being defined as one? And in case anybody is kidding themselves, the only reason Raw and Nitro are on in Canada in prime time is not because of any brilliant marketing, but because TSN lost all its NHL rights. TSN got real lucky this year that Raw picked up the slack in the ratings. Kind of like what happened to McMahon. Chuck Morris. Pennington, British Columbia. Response from Dave Meltzer. I haven't seen any OTR episodes with wrestling in several months, but the ones I saw I thought were really good. Vince didn't go on that show to give Michael Landsberg the exclusive of admitting that he lied, but was simply trying to babyface himself to a viewership that was very negative to him because of Hart's appearance about what happened, and he was actually fairly successful at it to some. It was not a means to get himself over as a heel by admitting he lied, because it was clear watching that show his intent was to babyface himself, and a good percentage of the reaction after that show was pro MC Mahan, although not the majority reaction. Lonsberg knew exactly what happened inside and out before the show. When McMahon tried to squirm away without answering the question, he wouldn't let him get away, and McMahon had no choice but to try and put a happy face spin while saying that he did tell Hart a different finish. You can tell it wasn't a planned spot by how much Lonsberg overcompensated on the second show in praising McMahon after cornering him. There are a lot of things on talk shows that are angles and planned high spots. I can tell you as a fact this wasn't one of them. Lonsberg before that point, and after that point as well, had very high regard for McMahon as a marketer. Nitro. The bit about the Nitro booking meetings had me in stitches until I realized whatever really is being said at them is probably nonsensical. Is Nash still working for Vince? I never thought South Carolina would become a WWF state, but it's becoming harder by the day to find someone who admits to being a WCW fan. I get a giggle when people talk about Flair being their hero. I remember having to run out of arenas 10 years ago because I'd cheer Flair over Dusty and Magnum. Selective memory is a beautiful thing. Michael Roper. Columbia, South Carolina. Somebody get Eric Bischoff a book about the history of vaudeville. It died because the acts never changed and people got tired of it. What do we have to look forward to? A Goldberg challenge that isn't about to happen? Flair versus Flair. That'll pop a buy rate. Oscar becoming Kevin Nash's personal lawn dart? Phasing out of the Horsemen? When Nash said that people would start having to do jobs, he of course meant everyone except those in the clique. I've finally had it. No more WCW for me. It's one thing to be non-competitive in real sports, but to be non-competitive in a work situation is where I stop watching. Super Brawl was the last straw. Why Flair didn't go over remains a mystery to me. I don't care if he goes over later. This was the right time. Does anyone even remotely think Bobby Heenan approaches being entertaining? He was and is an embarrassment. I can't believe Flair came back to this. This is a company where the unprofessional level of Shawn Michaels is the standard on top and everyone else are the jobbers. Every Tuesday morning, WCW loses. What part of this don't Bischoff, Hogan and Nash understand? Rick Carlson. Petaluma, California. Wrestling Channel. How come there is apparently no interest or action being taken to start a 24-hour wrestling channel similar to the ESPN Classic Sports Network? There must be literally tons of footage sitting in warehouses of promoters of days gone by collecting dust such as AWA, Mid-South, UWF, Smoky Mountain, Georgia, Florida, Central States, ICW World Class, Mid-Atlantic, as well as old WWF TV house shows originally from MSG, Prism and Nesson, old WCW, not to mention all the Japanese stuff. There is literally a treasure trove out there for wrestling fans. What do now defunct organizations like AWA and World Class do with their old tapes? Can you give any reason why something like this hasn't been thought of? If someone can do it for classic sports, then this can be done. If you don't agree, can you give me some good reasons why? Please don't give a lame answer like there isn't enough interest, because you can't tell me there's an abundance of interest in a 24-hour golf channel. Eric Kolmansky. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Response from Dave Meltzer. I think you'd have a hard time getting WWF, and maybe WCW as well, to cooperate with such a venture due to their ties with the networks they're already on. Not having both groups in would sour the idea to most investors in such a project. It would take a lot of money to start something like this, but done correctly today with the right cooperation, it would work and eventually be a big hit. Greatest ever. With Michael Jordan's retirement and the majority of people calling him the greatest basketball player of all time, I was wondering, based on athletic ability, working ability, consistency, durability and historical significance, and not based on interviews and charisma, who would you call the 5 or 10 best athletes in wrestling history? To me it's Terry Funk, Mitsuharu Misawa, Luthez, Jushin Liger, Manami Toyota, Jaguar Yokota, Dynamite Kid and Ray Stevens, heading the list. Simon Allen. Eastwood, New South Wales, Australia. Response from Dave Meltzer. That's hard to the point of almost being impossible. Putting all those criteria together, I'd pick Flair first for sure, and after that it's hard because he had so many good matches over such a long period of time with so many stiffs. How do you compare Frank Gotch, who must have been a great athlete and has major historical significance, to Mitsuharu Misawa, who is a great athlete and a fantastic worker with less historical significance in what is a completely different field, or to Strangler Lewis, Rikidozen, Gorgeous George or El Santo? Everyone says Buddy Rogers was the greatest worker of the 50s, but the game in the 90s is totally different and the wrestlers take so much more punishment and is so much more fast-paced. How can you compare them? Of the guys you mentioned, Funk was a good athlete, A fantastic worker, got hurt a lot but played hurt when most people wouldn't, and had historical significance more in Japan than the US but definitely had some. Misawa is a great athlete, great worker. So-so consistency but usually great on big shows. Good durability considering the style and some historical significance. Fez was a great athlete as his reflexes were almost freaky watching his tapes even though the style of wrestling was like a different universe from today. Must have had great durability considering how long he lasted on top and had a great deal of historical significance. Liger to this point is tops in all categories, although I question historical significance other than a great argument can be made for him as the greatest non-heavyweight of all time. Toyota was a super athlete in her peak period, but she's not all that old now and doesn't mean that much today. Yokota means a lot if you combine her work as a trainer. I'd rate Sayama ahead of Dynamite Kid because of historical significance, although both men ended their careers young as far as careers having super matches. I grew up watching Ray Stevens, and although a lot of people will have a hard time admitting it, as great as he was for his era, what he did in the ring, and he had incredible talent because in this area he's the standard everyone is judged by and can never compare with, can't hold a candle to someone like Kenta Kobashi, and for historical significance I don't think he means that much outside of San Francisco. Announcing. With the switch of the ratings lead to WWF, more mention should be given to the announcers. Jim Ross is the best announcer of our generation. Well, the criteria for an announcer, first and foremost, is storytelling. Selling the angles, pushing and covering up for the talent. Calling the match and building the emotion of the show is the responsibility of the announcer more than anyone. The audience won't give a hoot about someone unless the announcers do. Cases point. Would Emmitt Smith be a superstar if with the same career performance, he was treated indifferently by the announcers? If Emmitt ran for a touchdown and the announcers talked over it and instead talked about Troy Aikman, how over would he be? If on the halftime show nobody ever talked about Emmitt other than mention how many yards he gained, he'd have no ESPN interviews, no commercials, no guest spots on Misha, and only the educated football fans would respect his talent. Same with Chris Benoit. It all starts with the announcers. Jim Ross has successfully sold more dumb angles, covered for more bad workers, bad matches, and saved more bad shows than anyone. That's the measure of the announcer. Anyone can call a great match. A barking dog could. It's when you're calling a Mr. Ass, Kane and Big Boss Man triangle match where the announcer has to prove he can work. You will fail more than succeed trying to create something out of nothing, but that is the announcer's job. Jim Ross was instrumental in putting over The Rock, the New Age Outlaws, Kane, X-Pac, Val Venus, Mick Foley and many others over the years. With Ross sidelined, we'll see fewer new stars get created by the WWF. Jerry Lawler is absolutely hilarious. Not much else, and because of Ross, he doesn't need to be. Anyone who thinks Lawler carried Ross is unknowledgeable about announcers' duties. As for Tony Schiavone, if you own a company and the sales division has always fallen flat, what's the solution? Fire the head of sales. He's the consistent element. If I'm to understand his job title correctly, he's in charge of the booth and the other announcers. With all the talent rated from ECW, why hasn't someone pursued Joey Styles? I'll tell you why. Schiavone would want nothing to do with him. Styles would expose Schiavone faster than you could say job security. Schiavone isn't stupid and still remembers when Jim Ross came to the NWA. Styles in time, and with some help, would be great. As an announcer, Schiavone can be summed up with one word: safe. Never takes a chance. He does what he's told. He tries not to make mistakes. He's a doughboy and a paycheck collector. I can't even imagine Schiavone giving any kind of direction to Tenay, Heenan, and Zbyszko. One example of his being a doughboy is the pre-announcement of the Rock/Mankind title switch and his comments on Foley. Sorry, I don't buy the doing what he's told and had no choice BS. His position dictates he should have fought it. It was bad business to announce it, and outright brain damage to make those comments about Foley. If Schiavone had fought it, he probably could have gotten out of at least saying the Foley comments. He said it and should have at least taken responsibility for it. Instead, he finger-pointed. He needs to be demoted to simply an announcer and be thankful Ted Turner doesn't know what's going on in WCW. Ted Turner would fire a guy like that. Mike Tenay is the most knowledgeable announcer in the business. Not as charismatic as Tony, which is scary, and that's why he's there. His announcing style is like the VH1 pop-up video. He throws out some knowledge and background and shuts up real fast. There is no energy or impact to it. He's a poor storyteller. His Observer Award was more of a Rookie of the Year award, and that's not meant as an insult. Larry Zbyszko single-handedly pushed a virtual unknown into a star performer. Of course, it was himself. He bad-mouths the cruiserweights. He seems to work against getting anyone over except Goldberg, or anything, as he kills every angle when he talks about how he wouldn't have fallen for it. Take away the voice and charisma and you have David Crockett. In the old days he would announce like Jesse Ventura, giving a wrestler's perspective in a unique way. He needs to get back to that. WCW needs to get rid of the booth. The booth is too quiet and takes away from the heat of the fans. They need a table by the ring, thereby making it necessary for the announcers to speak loudly and get some sizzle going. Watch the lights on your stereo when Ross and Lawler are talking, then switch to Nitro and you'll see the lights calm down. They need to cut back to a two-man crew. Chemistry can be created by Lawler/Ross and Madden/Summerall. The three-man team has everyone trying to be polite enough and not interrupt the other guy. Like Nitro or Monday Night Football. Rob Smith. Sarasota, Florida. Response from Dave Meltzer. There is a huge difference between the announcing jobs on Raw and Nitro. The Raw announcers are given direction of where everything is going to lead the viewer. The Nitro announcers are supposed to play dumb, not have any direction, with the idea that if they know nothing, they'll react naturally to the angles as they appear, which more often than not backfires. Ross is the best, but the Nitro announcers are out there working without a net and put in a position to be fools. You can't tell stories when you don't know the stories to tell. This seems to be a subject people have a problem with, but they don't understand what the job of an announcer for wrestling is, which simply put is, to shill for 2 or 3 hours about what the owner, president, of the company tells you to and try and make it seem important. Why is Schiavone gutless for saying what he said about Foley and Jim Ross isn't for saying what he said about Goldberg or Hogan or anyone else? Oh yeah, since Foley takes more bumps, he's above criticism. Since what Schiavone said was obviously detrimental to his own cause? If Ross was around now for the Gillberg skits, he would hate them. He went on his hotline and basically said he wished they'd stop them and knew they wouldn't. But if he was on the show these past few weeks, he'd know what his job is better than anyone. If you think he'd tell McMahon he refuses to do this skit because it's tasteless or because it mocks a wrestler who he's been a friend of, or at least an acquaintance of more almost 15 years and who the WWF wishes they had today, or forgetting that, because there is a good chance it'll work in reverse in making that guy more of a star and help the opposition, then you also have no idea what the job of an announcer in pro wrestling is. Neither Schiavone nor Ross should be above criticism for it, but don't act like one did something wrong when the other did close to the same thing under the same circumstances. Ross and Goldberg are acquaintances dating back to Goldberg's high school days when Ross was an aficionado of Oklahoma high school ball and Goldberg was a big star in Tulsa, and Ross later was an announcer for the Falcons when Goldberg was on the team, and on more than one occasion, Ross tried to get Goldberg into the WWF. But he's still under orders, called Goldberg a stone cold wannabe, and if he wasn't ill today, would be trying to get over the Gillberg skits, even if he didn't like them.